Good. Okay, good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome everybody to the March meeting of the Laconia Zoning Board of Adjustments. With that, we're going to go ahead and get started. If you would call to order, please. Oh, I called you order. Roll call. Sorry.
Mike Delvecchio. Here. Roland Mayhew.
Here.
Suzanne Purley.
Here.
Ori Gibbs.
Here.
Mike Foote.
Here.
And Steve Bogert.
Here.
And we have the planning director, Steve Dean Trefethen. And I, Robert Moore, will be doing the minutes.
Okay. With that, we're going to go ahead and next on the agenda is the acceptance of the minutes.
Okay, I would, this time, like to make a motion to defer accepting the minutes. I went through them, as did several other members here, and we just don't feel they're complete. They're not showing what we say when we make a motion. We are taught, the ZBA members, the most important thing we do is address the criteria. And in the minutes, you haven't addressed anything that we said. And when Ori, for example, makes a motion, she goes into great detail. There was nothing in the minutes about anything she said. So would you like to talk a little bit about that, Ori, or?
Yeah, I feel as though in the past, when we've made the motions and we've addressed the criteria for whatever the application is, what we specifically say that we've used to base our decision on has been included in the minutes. For example, if we say it's not contrary to the public interest, we say that it increases no burden on public utilities, that it's not detrimental to the character of the neighborhood. And we're just concerned that with nothing there at all, should we be required at some point to back up or explain why we felt or why we made the decision we did? There's nothing for us in the minutes to go back now and look at to help us refresh our memories as to why. So if you look at minutes in the past, you'll see that there's a very long explanation following each of the criteria. And this is just essentially reiterating what's in the application without the explanation and the justification and substantiation. So that's, I think, what we're
Because
what
any
we're
judge
looking
would
for.
look at the minutes from last meeting and say, ZBA, you erred. But we didn't. We went through the motion and we explained our situation, but nothing appeared in the minutes. So, do you understand what we're saying? So if you could go back and, you know, recorrect those minutes and try to add some of the verbiage that was, and reasoning that was given at the meeting on the motions, then that'll be fine. And going forward, I'm sorry, Herman?
I'm just wondering if we need a verbatim minutes of everything that took place verbatim during the course of the meeting when we have backup with the television and with the recordings. Excuse me, can I finish, please? We have those.
However, the tapes fail on a regular basis. They've failed at city council several times, they've failed at planning board several times, so we never know. But the fact of the matter is, the minutes are the permanent recording of the meeting, and if there just be a little more explanation, I don't think they need to be verbatim, but they need to record the motion at least that we made, and the substantive discussion to show that we considered the application.
I agree. I think they need a little bit more, they need to be fleshed out a little bit more. Maybe not word for what we say, but they need to reflect that we did actually consider each of the items, each of the criteria, and this is what we said to back up our reasoning. Or this is the summation of what we said to back up our reasoning. Despite the fact that they may be recorded, we may not have access to the recordings. We may not be able to find the recordings. And I know that from past experience going through old records where this is the kind of minutes that you're handed to look at, it fails to provide the information that you need to prove whatever it is, the point that you're trying to prove, or the facts that you're trying to establish. And I just think that it needs a little more detail, perhaps not without going into verbatim, but it needs more detail.
Because we're a board that gets sued on a regular basis.
I don't agree, but that's all right.
Anyway, so I have a motion on the table to defer the minutes to the next meeting for corrections.
Oh, and I second.
So we have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor of the motion? All those against? The
I didn't
motion.
put my hand up.
So that means you're against.
Yes.
Okay, because you could abstain also, so that's why I have to. So 4-1, it'll defer. Okay. Next on the agenda is, we're going to continue the public hearings, considering the vote. The possibility of the agenda is for the board to continue public hearings. Okay, the next application is 84 Summit Avenue, application 2017-0036. Applicant is seeking a variance to store trailers in the front yard of the property.
And Mr. Chair, I'll be recusing myself.
Okay? And, I'm sorry,
Mike.
Mike. You'll be sitting in. The applicant,
Good evening, Richard Holmesy, 84 Summit Ave, Laconia.
hi.
How are you all? I'm not sure where you want me to start off. Last month, I was here before the board, and we decided, the board made a suggestion, and I agreed to table it until they got a legal decision on a matter between Governor's Island and the city of Laconia. And I'd like to know if that issue has been brought, if that's been found out as a determination or not.
Yes, it has been determined that the city of Laconia will treat the Governor's Island as an abutter, okay, as all. We do not have to abide by any of the restrictions or whatever that are set forth by their covenants, or unless it is indeed spelled out in your deed. So if your deed said you couldn't put a trailer on your property, then you would have to abide by that, if I'm not mistaken, right, Dean? But as far as what's between you and your homeowners association
Yeah,
is between you and your homeowners association.
okay,
Has no bearing on us whatsoever.
However, what it does mean, and what the attorney did say, is then the homeowners association has the right to turn around and sue you.
I'm sorry, the homeowners association is what, ma'am?
The right to sue you.
Correct, correct. I understand that, but I object to anything as far as Governor's Island communication here tonight, for the reason being that I confirmed this past week from Dean, the planning director, that a body of water, as wide as it is, or any body of water, any lake, is a break of an abutter situation, and a river and a stream, as he stated, would constitute a abutter situation.
Well,
And-
sir, if I may interrupt you so we can continue.
Sure.
We appreciate your stand, and we take your consideration into viewpoint. With that being said, but we don't abide by that, okay? We will take that definition of what the abutter is, and we apply the definitions via the board, okay?
Okay.
And how this board interprets the zoning laws. And if then there's a interpretation issue with how we interpret it, then once again, you have civil rights that you can take at that point.
Okay,
Okay, you can disagree with us in court or whatever, but our interpretation of what the zoning laws say is final and by the direction of a judge.
okay,
Okay, we do take advice from the planning director. They give us very good guidance in that, okay? And we have had abutters with islands, okay? So an island sitting there has abutters, okay? And in this instance, one of your abutters is Governor's Island Association.
Well,
So-
the attorney says that we can ask and get input from the condos, the association.
Okay.
That has
okay,
bearing on you.
Okay.
So we will be asking for their input tonight.
okay,
As with any abutter.
okay.
And that's
I-
all the bearing, that's what I was trying to explain. The
So-
only bearing they provide is as any other abutter
Okay,
would provide.
okay. So with that said, I'd like to know at this point in time, Dean's here tonight, what is the abutter guidelines? How many feet constitutes an abutter? I know it's, if I'm correct, it's anyone that touches my property, but within how many feet is an abutter?
Please.
Oh, through the chair, I'm sorry,
Yeah, no, that's
through
right.
the chair.
So the term abutter can be used as it relates to the zoning board, can be used in two different ways. One is the legal definition of abutter, which is, as you stated, is someone that either directly abuts your property or is across the street from your property, or, as the state law says, across a stream or a river. So that's the legal definition of abutter, and that would be the people that we would notify about this meeting, and we have notified about this meeting.
Okay,
The other way to use abutter is really any other interested party that is nearby, and nearby is a very broad term. It's not defined. So in this case, when we got the legal advice that we can request the homeowners association input, but we would treat it as any other abutter's input, we're using the broader term of abutter, not the legal definition of abutter, if you follow me.
okay, but there's no distance that is required in the city bylaws that speaks about 100 feet, 200 feet, 500 feet, nothing that speaks. An
It
abutter
is-
could
it
be
is-
across town if the city feels it deemed?
A butter could be across town from the standpoint of providing input to the board. From a standpoint of us
okay.
having to notify anyone, we would be using the legal term abutter, which is the direct people that are abutting your property.
Okay, okay. I know I'm going to have some opposition here tonight. I see the people in the room, and I have some support in the room as well. So I'll just go on with my presentation for a couple of minutes, and then we'll go from there.
Very good. Thank you.
It's fairly reasonable, I think, to assume or to believe, more importantly, that any property in the Lakes region, in any town, is going to have a trailer or two in their driveway. It's also reasonable to believe that these properties are going to obtain or retain motorcycles, RVs, RV trailers, camping trailers, jet skis, boats, four-wheelers, golf carts, snowmobiles, etc. All these items, all these on-road and off-road vehicles are used throughout the Lakes region. They're a very, very large support system for the Lakes region, for cities and towns throughout the Lakes region. To assume that anything other than one or two, many houses, not all houses, to assume that many houses will not have one or two trailers is absolutely unreasonable. So I want to just make that clear. That's my opinion at this point, that if you drive down the zone in which I live in, the SFR zone, right now today there's 22 properties that have a trailer or two in their front yard. SFR, Shorefront Residential, I believe it stands for. And there's 21 properties today that have something in their front yard, one or two, jet ski, boat, winterized, stored, snowmobile, construction trailer, landscape trailers, they're all there. And they're very visible. You can see they've been there for the entire winter because the trailers haven't moved. I know some of the board members here tonight have driven by my property. They've looked at my property through the winter months or in the last month or so while this has been coming on. So feel free, you can go to those properties in the Shorefront Residential Zone and see for yourself that, because I'm sure no one's going to move all their stuff tomorrow morning, and you can witness that my opinion is a fact. I again strongly oppose Governor's Island's input on this because I don't feel they have any jurisdiction. I know what the legal aspect came from the attorney that you retained for the city, but I feel that that's not being fair and reasonable to a taxpayer such as myself in the city of Laconia to say that that the entire island is all of a sudden an abutter, although I get an opinion from Dean about the planning director this past week that that's not the case, and he made it very clear that wasn't the case. And now there's another situation that's coming up as far as a broader term, but not the legal term. So I'm opposing that. I don't feel that the city of Laconia is governed and owes anything to Governor's Island in this situation, I think they owe it to the city of Laconia, not the town of Guilford, and the club, or Governor's Island Club Incorporated. In good faith, since the last meeting, I have moved 3 trailers off the property, the 3 largest trailers, which is one's a storage trailer, one's a landscape trailer, and one was a snowmobile trailer that was for sale. So I've moved those off the property in good faith. What I've also willing to do tonight, at the time many pictures were taken, at the time of my application, there was 7 or so trailers on the property. All of them are non-commercially registered. None of them are used in commerce. They are all used on my personal property, 84 Summit Ave, Laconia, or referenced for that property, like a snowmobile trailer. Store it there. Maybe I'll go to Pittsburgh, or maybe I'll just go down the street to Route 3 snowmobile trails here in Laconia, or whatever. So they're all relative to that property. They're all personal use, non-commerce, but out of good faith, I took 3 off the property, and there are 4 or 5 there now. So my application, I'd be willing to work with the city out of good faith and amend the application not for a blank variance, but for a variance to store 4 trailers, which I think is fair and reasonable for the 4 seasons that we have. You could have a motorcycle, like I said, that whole list that's on the recording already, not to repeat myself, of all those on and off-road vehicles that may or may not need trailers. So I've already done the due diligence. There's a couple of trailers that I can't move because the water has melted, snow's melted, frozen, and I'd only be doing damage to my assets. So I gotta wait till the spring to move those. But I have moved 3 of them, 3.5 weeks ago, right after the last meeting. I moved them and I took them to a different location. So my position still stands that I'm going to be putting bushes and trees in the springtime to match what is also on Summit Ave, which I've replaced recently. I want you to take into consideration that nobody's property looks all that great in the winter. And, with the trees down, we've had a lot of tree damage, and I've had a considerable amount of tree damage, so I want you to look past the 50 or 60 tree logs that are sitting on my property waiting to be trucked away in the spring, and the damage that occurred from that. And we're still doing that cleanup come the spring, but that storm was October 30th. I couldn't move any of my assets that got smashed, and quite a few of them did get smashed for almost 3 weeks until the insurance companies looked at them. And then by that time, it was almost the end of November, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I did stick things in, where I could to get them out of the way. They've been out of the way all winter up along Wentworth Cove Road. I saw a letter today that I'm assuming you have from Governor's Island, and it speaks about how I filed my application, and I plan on putting trailers between my house and Summit Ave. That's simply not true. My request for the trailers is to put them where they are right now, which is along Wentworth Cove Road, between Wentworth Cove Road and on my property. There are very large bushes and trees on that side of the property. So once things grow in again, come springtime, it'll be thicker, it'll be fuller, and you won't see them, more so you'll see them less than now. So I'm not looking to put them on Summit Ave. It's not a true statement. I don't know how much you're weighing on their document, and just for the record, I've been provided nothing from the city as far as a letter from Governor's Island, pictures, Dave Jennings photos, pictures. Dave Jennings wrote a letter after last month's meeting. I've been provided with nothing to defend. So if and when that comes up that you are going to take any of these things in consideration, I would then ask to come back before the board and speak on behalf of those issues. I'm here out of good faith to, once I found out that there was a problem, I filed the application for a variance. I believe I've shown the hardship because, 1, I don't have a backyard because I'm waterfront. 2, the second hardship is I have 2 frontages to deal with. And 3, the other hardship is I'm missing 1 sideline. So being a corner lot, I lose a sideline, I lose an abutter. That maybe I could put some trees up against and block everything. I lose a backyard because I'm waterfront. And I think those 4 items and those 4 topics do constitute some type of a hardship. And I don't think it's fair and reasonable that anyone be asked to sell their assets that are so much supported in the Lakes region just because someone else doesn't like the way they look in their yard at some specific time or another. Any photos that come before you, if there are items in front of my house, trailers or anything directly in the driveway, they're there temporarily for usage. So, if I use a trailer to go somewhere, with great distance, I'm going to grease it and lube it, check the lights before I do it. And then when I bring it back, I'm going to wash it down, clean it before I put it away. So generally speaking, the trailers are in between all the trees and the bushes on Wentworth Cove Road. And the bushes themselves are about 8 feet in diameter. So it's 4 of those, it's 32 feet, plus the distance in between. And I've got neighbors, I've got some letters tonight, if you'd like, I could present to the board, from Mr. Lapine. Two gentlemen named Lapine brothers on Summit Ave that live right across the street from me in that corner house, number 60 Summit Ave, that support my trailer situation because they don't bother them. We walk by all the time, they look outside, the letters are here, I have them, I can turn them into the board. So Janine, Mr. Lapine, and Mr. Lapine's brother, they all reside at 60 Summit Ave, and they're in support of my variance request. There are other people here I'm sure would like to speak, and I thank you for your time. Are there any questions for the board directly?
On your application where you put your 5 answers to the question, in the header, you have your name and then you have, not sure how to pronounce your last name.
Holmesy.
Holmesy?
Yes, thank you.
You got Holmesy Crossing. Could you elaborate what Holmesy Crossing is?
20 years ago, August, I bought that property. And about 19 years ago, someone made a joke and called it the Holmesy Compound. And it kind of stuck. And we got some bathrobes made as a joke for my mother and the grandchildren, my children and my brother's children. So it became a joke. And then someone had a sign made and put it on my back porch, a nice sign saying, "Welcome to the Holmesy Compound," et cetera, et cetera. So to me, the word compound seems a little ostentatious, and they made a joke about the Kennedy compound at the same time down the Cape. And that's where they made this joke from, referenced it from. So in the last couple of years, a few of us decided to change it to the Holmesy Crossing based on a bunch of reasons. But it softens the ostentatious thing that I'm not into. I'm not very showy. I have what I have because I'm very lucky and fortunate to have a job and a good family to back me, but I'm not a big showy guy. But so the Holmesy Crossing is just, you cross I'm the only lot between Wentworth Cove Road and Governor's Island. So you cross me to get to the island. So it became a joke that turned into a name, just like on Governor's Island. There's Land's End, he's got a sign on his house. There's Governor's Crossing on Weirs Road. There's Richard Latender has a big sign in the front of his, Latenders, so there's different people have different names that they've named their properties. Wolf's End, their last name is Wolf, Land's End is on Governor's Island. He's at the end of the Governor's Island area, at the end of the island, and supposedly he was the ex-CEO of Land's End Corporation. So there's all different reasons for everyone to have these, so that's where that came from.
Okay. Now, going through the 5 criteria, one of the ones that you were using as your hardship and stuff, you're going through and saying that you don't have a backyard, and in fact, you've said it a couple of times
Yes.
tonight. And a backyard is, whether it's waterfront or not, you still have a backyard, okay? A backyard goes from the back of your house to your side property lines,
Okay.
okay, to your end of your property line from the back of your house. So you do have a backyard.
Okay, technically speaking, by a plot plan, there is a backyard.
Right.
Sorry for that.
That's what I wanted to get
Okay.
cleared up, okay?
If that's a technical situation that you want to clear up, I agree with you that based on a plot plan, every waterfront property has a backyard.
That's correct.
Because, right. I shouldn't say every, because there's actually one lot in Guilford that doesn't have a front yard, but anyways. There is one, but anyway, yeah, I understand.
Okay. All right.
If you'd
Anybody
like me to elaborate on that, just to be clear, since we're being technical, the backyard that I'm referring to that I don't have one basically is the reason for being, nobody wants to see trailers stored on the waterfront of any lake. So lakes are beautified, nature, we've got a lot of wildlife living there and so forth. The trailers possibly could leak grease or tires, debris, anything could get into the water. And I'm not sure if the DES would support anything being that close to the water. And my house is 57 feet from the corner of Lake Winnipesaukee, so it's already, 7 feet over, but it's under the requirement, so we're in good shape. There's no setback problem there. So there's really no room to put any trailers because of the setback.
Okay.
So I think the DES setback requirement would not allow me to put the trailers in the backyard, if I'm correct.
I'm not sure about
I'm
that.
not
I
sure,
can't
but
speak
I'm-
For DES, but usually they look at the pervious, non-pervious type materials being used, but I wouldn't want to speak for them
Yep.
or their behalf.
I
but-
understand. Any other questions for me at this time?
I don't. Anybody else?
No?
No, not
Okay.
at this time. may
Thank you.
have a seat.
Thank you.
At this point, I'd like to open it up to the public and ask if anybody from the public wishes to speak for or against this application. Please come forward at this time and introduce yourself for the record.
Hi, I'm Dave Jennings. I'm the abutter to Mr. Holmesy. And I'm the abutter where he has all the trailers and jet skis and equipment, snowmobiles, et cetera, against my property line, some of them actually over the property line. I have the same situation I have, as he would put it, no backyard, which is my waterfront. So I don't have any place to park all this equipment if I wanted to leave it, because I have numerous snowmobiles and motorcycles and boats and all that. But I store them properly, and I store them out of sight and other locations or in the garage. So I don't appreciate having to look out my front windows and having to look at all of this stuff on my property line or up against my property line. So, and I've sent you guys a letter to that effect, and I've given you numerous documents of pictures that evidence the stuff that's on the property line, against the property line, actually on my property. So I'm absolutely against this variance being granted for that reason, because if you go down my whole property line, all the storage that he has is against the property line, from the Wentworth Grove all the way down to the water. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Mr. Chairman, board members, Paul Fitzgerald from Westcott Law, representing the Governor's Island Club, and thank you for hearing from the club this evening. Last month, Ms. Lacey from my office presented to you a detailed analysis of the 5 criteria required for a variance, and we've also submitted a letter to you going over that, and so I'm not going to repeat all of that tonight. I don't think it gets us any further to say the same thing twice.
This letter that people are referring to, did you submit a letter recently?
The letter that I'm talking about
That's the one,
now
Paul?
was, the letter that I'm talking about now was submitted before the board meeting last month, excuse me.
So it was just what was with this, whoever presented to the firm, it was all.
Oh, yeah, I've got it.
It ran 2 or 3 pages.
Okay, so
Roland, if you think I can see that far.
I think this is the one,
What's the date on it?
February 20th.
That sounds right then.
That's just the one?
Oh, yeah. Because that was the date of your meeting, wasn't it?
Yeah.
okay. So that's the one you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay, great, okay, thank you.
Yeah. In any event, the point I'm making is we've already been through the criteria, so I'm not going to go through all of that again tonight, except to point out to you that neither in the application nor in the oral presentation last month or this evening, in my opinion, did Mr. Holmesy address the variance criteria with any degree of detail. that would allow you to grant a variance that could be upheld if it were to be reviewed by the Superior Court. So that's the first thing I'd like you to keep in mind. The next thing that I want to address is simply the amendment to the application that's been made this evening, where Mr. Holmesy has indicated that he's willing to put a restriction on there for no more than 4 trailers. Last month, he spoke in terms, I think it was in response to a direct question by a board member as to how many trailers there were, and the answer was 6. So this evening now, we're down by 2 to 4, and I would simply ask you to think for a moment about looking across the street from your own home. And would you want to see a jet ski trailer, a motorcycle trailer, 2 boat trailers, or some combination with utility trailers there on a permanent storage basis? And I got to believe that the answer for most of us would be no. I know that I wouldn't particularly care for it. And if you're familiar with the area, as I'm sure you are at this particular point, simply by living in Laconia and maybe by looking at it for this application, you know that it's not customary to see 4, 5, 6, or any number of trailers out in the front yards of these particular properties. These properties are well kept, whether they're on the island or otherwise. The ones on Summit Avenue and the ones on Wentworth Cove Road, they're extremely well kept. People take pride in the properties, and they don't turn them into storage lots for boat trailers or the like. So we think that you should consider that as well, that we're talking about the impact on the entire neighborhood, which is something that you can take into consideration, that you should think that through and consider the impact that it would have to have all these trailers lined up, regardless of whether they're facing Summit or Wentworth. It would still be a highly negative situation. Because of the detail of the presentation that we gave you last month, both orally and in writing, I'm going to stop now unless you have any specific questions. If you have any interest in the club's viewpoints as expressed in that letter, certainly amplify that further. But thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Is there anybody else from the public who wishes to speak for or against this application? Please come forward.
Hi, my name is Jeff Lynch at 40, 50, and 57 Summit. I'm a direct abutter to Mr. Holmesy. We enjoy this area. We enjoy the serenity, the scenery, everything like that. This is just not conducive to an area which would support this type of storage. There's just way too many things on that lot, and I'm a direct abutter, and I have to look at it every day, and I'm not happy about it. We shouldn't even be here tonight. There should have been some enforcement a long time ago. We need to stop this. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak for or against this application? Please come forward at this time. Introduce yourself for the record.
I'm not a direct abutter.
Please, at the mic.
My name's Chris Rahley, and I'm 2 houses. I'm next to Dave Jennings. And Richie does take care of his property, you know, as far as maintaining it and all that, you know. I try and take care of mine, Dave takes care of his. You know, we all do it in different ways, you know what I mean? You know, I have a trailer up there in the summer. I manicure my yard every week. I put all the stuff in my dump trailer, and I take it to the you know, dump once or twice a year, whatever. Richie does the same thing. You know, something like that probably, you know what I mean, should be granted, you know what I mean? But, you know, you got to work with people and be reasonable about things, I think, a little bit, you know, and there should be a happy medium for everybody. You know, again, I got jet ski trailers. You know, I'm fortunate I have a garage to put it in, you know, but, you know, unfortunately he doesn't. But like I said, you know, I keep a dump trailer. I have no other way. I don't have a pickup truck or anything. I have no other way to get rid of the grass clippings, the branches. You know, I got a ton of trees around. And, you know, I'm constantly picking up branches, throwing them in my trailer every single week when we go up there. So, you know, things like that, you know, should come into play for, you know what I mean, for people. That's all. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else wish to speak for or against this application? Please come forward at this time. Introduce yourself. Let the record indicate no one else wished to speak for or against this application. I'll bring it back to the board. Any further questions of the applicant?
I do. Could you come back up, Mr. Homsey? So do you or don't you have a garage?
The house was built as a two-car garage. When I moved in, it was a three-quarter garage because there's stairs, it was a bedroom, bathroom upstairs, and stairs in the way going up to the garage. So right now, the garage area that's storage is about 8 by 8, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, 6 by 8. It's pretty small. So back in 1947, the house was erected, and from that date forward, there has been no additions, no dormers blown out, no footprint change, no height change, nothing. But there's always been an apartment, a bedroom, bathroom upstairs since it was built. And the lower section, part of the lower section of the garage was converted to a kitchen living room area. But part of it is still storage for, like, I keep shovels and stuff in there. So just about 8 feet by 8 feet is what's left.
So you have a rental property on your site?
No, ma'am. No, my family's been using it since 19 years now. And right now it's empty. My family, unfortunately, has been diminishing. As people get older, we get older. My mother, my father, my brother passed away. So things are getting smaller. Kids are growing up. They're going to do their own things. They don't like to come around as much. So that's the situation at hand. And just so you know, I did apply to the city for a garage, and I have a permit for a garage and a structure and a so forth and so on. But with the lawsuit with Governor's Island, which I'm sure everyone in this room is aware of, Governor's Island has put a stop to that. So, you know, that's in negotiations, it's on the table, it's not an issue for tonight. Again, I object to,
You admit that you have an association with the Governor's Island.
I do have an association with them, my deed does, but I also admit that the city gave me a permit. So I didn't need to jump through hoops, I did the right thing, I applied for a permit, I want to build a garage, I want to put the stuff indoors, I want to cover it up. My assets outside, it's doing no justice to my assets. Yard furniture, we cover it up. We do the best we can. Snowmobiles, you know, you try to cover them. The wind blows. Look at the wind. We have the damage. My motorcycle got totaled in October. My 2 snowmobiles got damaged. 2 jet skis got damaged. 2 trailers got totaled. A lot of these things weren't covered by insurance. So regardless of that, what I'm saying is if I had a garage where the city has approved me for the garage, none of my assets would have been totaled, and we probably wouldn't be here tonight. So Governor's Island is saying one thing to me, and they're also saying something else to me, and they're saying something else. So it's all wishy-washy. It's a very technical situation. Yes.
How big a garage would you need to build? Would it be able to hold 4 travel trailers, 4 jet skis, 2 motorcycles?
I don't own.
Motorcycles, let me clear something up. The motorcycles are not in question, so
But I'm just
Trailers.
I guess an
vehicle
amendment-
that are used for personal vehicle for using for travel, so those are taken off of the, not even in the mix of the discussion.
So if I'm to understand, the only thing that's in question tonight is trailers.
Absolutely, that's what your
Okay.
variance was for.
Okay. So, right, that's where the complaint was.
Okay, so now you want to have 4 trailers.
I want to limit it to 4.
And could you explain to us what the purpose of
Wait a
those?
minute, let him finish with
were you
Michael,
done?
please.
Yes. So if I can answer Michael's question, Mr. Foote, I applied for a permit originally. Let me just get the math right. I believe it was 16 by 32. And I was going to put a cottage on top that was down the street. And it got approved by the state, Shoreland Protection, and the city of Laconia. Governor's Island objected to it, and they stopped it. Now, in negotiations, I have a conditional approval for a 32 by 60 garage from Governor's Island because it meets the criteria with the city. Have I applied to the city? No, because it meets the criteria. So there's already living quarters on the property, so a standalone garage is allowed on that property. I haven't applied for it because, 1, there's no money right now, but 2, if Governor's Island says no, then what's the point of applying for it? So it's just a waste of an application fee. So 32 by 60 is what I hope to build on that property, and I hope that will enclose everything that I need to from this day forward. But in the meantime, I'm asking for a variance for 4 trailers to be left as storage on the property within the trees and property. My reason for putting them in the trees, I hope you understand, in the trees and in the bushes, 90% of the time they're not seen. You drive down Summit Ave, you can't see them. I have so many trees on Summit Ave that you don't really see them far over towards Wentworth Cove Road. Now, Mr. Jennings stood here tonight and said he's opposed, he's against it and so forth, and he put like 50 or 60 bushes in between himself and myself. But what he put in was 3 foot tall. Mr. Jennings has the right to put in whatever he wants. If he's worried about how my property looks, whether it's my grass or my driveway or my trailers, he should put up something taller. You know, maybe he should put up a fence or whatever. So that's my answer, Mr. Foote. I wouldn't build to what I wouldn't build like a 200 by 200 just to have it. You know what I mean? I'm only building what I need.
I'm gonna go back to the fence.
What fence?
Why, if we're talking about bushes and the density of bushes, and bushes grow and take up more room, what's wrong with a fence-bush combination?
Well, I think that's not.
What?
Well, I don't know if that applies here because are you saying for me to build it or for Mr. Jennings to build it? Because let me just say this. Mr. Lapine and his brother, Rusty Lapine, who live directly across Wentworth Cove Road, they pull out of their driveway every day. Their front door is on Wentworth Cove Road. I have a letter tonight with their support from both of them. Both of them, I have it tonight. So they're the ones that look at it every single day.
You know,
So-
I've been over there and I've looked at it. It's
Yes.
clear, you know, they're sitting right there. They're so obvious.
With-
They're not hidden in any way.
With all due respect, I have nowhere to hide them because I'm dealing with the variance request that I made, the hardship that I'm talking about. So that's very true. But did you drive down the street in the shorefront residential zone?
That's not on the table tonight. What's on
Okay.
the table is your property.
Okay, you're right. Well, what's fair for one person has to be fair for everybody.
And the city, that's a city problem.
Okay, well, and you're the city. So
We're the zoning.
well, you're the zoning board. Okay, so all right, we'll take that issue up maybe later on, who knows? So yes, I understand that there's too many of them there. I understand that. And like I said, in good faith, I already moved the 3 biggest ones. So I'm willing to leave those off the premise. I'm sorry? I'm willing to limit it to 4.
Okay, so now I'm just gonna, is it okay if I go? I mean, what do you want to do?
You want to go do what?
Well, my feeling
Is
is,
it a question
Well-
or is it an opinion?
If it's an opinion.
it's
If it's not a question, then it's part of the discussion.
not a question, it's, I guess I wanted to ask for, my personal feeling is, I agree that you can have storage on your property, it's sort of a right to a certain degree.
Okay.
I also know what the ordinance says, and, and that people have the right not to have to look at your storage bin. You have a 1 acre lot, it's a big lot.
Correct.
And I think that there are options on that lot for placement of these storage containers, if I'm not mistaken. However, we don't have any information, and my thought was, could you bring us a plot plan of exactly where these things could be sited, so that we approve something that's concrete and not just say 4 trailers?
I probably could, but the only thing that's before the board tonight is trailers, and trailers can't be stored in a storage container. I think many people in this room would object to a storage container versus a garage. A storage container, ma'am, a storage container is going to look like a commercial zone. It's going to look like a electrical warehouse or something.
I'm sorry, did I say storage?
Yes,
Well, you're asking for trailers.
Right.
but
You
there,
have big storage containers on your property now.
no, I don't, ma'am.
No, that's the next application.
What storage container do I have in my property?
2 on the corner those are 2 big
Oh, no, those are gone, and since the last time those are landscape trailers, ma'am. They're not storage containers, they have wheels. A storage container doesn't have wheels, just to be clear. The 2 trailers that you're speaking of, the 2 storage containers, they're not storage containers. They're utility trailers, they're called landscape trailers, they're both off the premises. They've been off since last month.
I would like, personally, more information on exactly and where you propose to put these things, and I want it on a drawing.
Right where they are now, because that's the most inconspicuous spot possible. there's nowhere else inconspicuously enough to put them, but I'm willing to go from 7 down to 4. I think that's a step, and Mr. Mayhew had a question as well.
It almost is a site visit.
It's what, ma'am?
We may have to do a site visit.
Well, I mean, there's other locations I'm sure you're well aware of on Weirs Road that are much, much worse than mine that the city has
They're not asking.
taken no action on.
Storage trailers in their front yard.
They have many trailers in their front yard.
They're not on the agenda tonight.
Okay. Mr. Mayhew?
Richard, I just wanted to bring up one
Go right ahead, sir. I'm right here.
point,
What?
and we wouldn't be here tonight if you hadn't done this too. If you hadn't joined the Governor's Island Club. When you did, now, your property is not on Governor's Island.
I'm going to interject you for, oh, no, go ahead, finish. Go ahead.
Okay, you're on the Laconia side of Governor's Island.
That's correct.
Of the channel.
Correct.
If you hadn't joined Governor's Island,
Yep.
they'd still be your butters and they'd still complain. But you wouldn't. they
I'd have a
wouldn't
garage
they wouldn't
right
hold
now.
sway over it because you're a member. And my question is.
Yes.
If you join, and I don't know why you joined the Governor's Island Club, there must have been some advantage at the time you did it, but
Nope.
that's beside the point. You belong to an association, and you know what the bylaws are of the association, and you could have, by not joining, done pretty well what you want on your property. But by joining that, you accepted some restrictions. And we have to take those restrictions into consideration because you are a member of the association, not just because they're a butter.
Well,
Mr. Mayhew, if I may interject there at the moment, we don't abide by what a homeowners association.
I didn't say, did I say we did?
Yes.
I didn't mean to.
Yes, that's why I wanted to
No, I
correct
said
that
he
up front.
he should be abiding by the association.
That's between him and the civil
Right.
courts, okay? Whatever direction they take, all right? We just abide by what's in the zoning code.
if I may,
That's how we interpret it and how it applies to each individual property.
if I may answer Mr. Mayhew.
Now,
20 some odd years ago when I bought, 20 years ago when I bought the property at 84 Summit Ave, the property was attached, the deed was attached by Governor's Island Club, covenants and restrictions. I should have looked into it deeper, my bad, okay? They don't want me there, but they want my money. They want the $1,000 a year. It's very important to them to have their thumb on me and have that $1,000 a year. So we've been fighting for 6 years in court on the front page of the paper, and the lawsuit's over $150,000 now. It's disgusting. So why did I join? I joined because it was already part of the association, the deed. But I joined the club because I was misrepresented by the realtor, and I didn't take it upon myself to have the facts investigated. And the realtor at the time that I bought it from, Sue Bradley, is a very, very dominant structure of Governor's Island, and it appears that not all the rules are the same for everybody. Let's just say that and leave it at that. So I would love it if I wasn't part of the club, and I would have already had my garage because the city approved it, and we wouldn't be here tonight. But like I said, I want you to keep in mind when you take Governor's Island Club into consideration that, as the chair said, you're not obligated to them, and they have no jurisdiction from a club perspective. And if you're claiming tonight that the broad view of an abutter may matter, you should keep in mind that you approved a building, they denied it. You'll probably approve some type of a variance, they're going to want it denied. They're asking for it to be denied. They're not being very friendly as a neighbor. They just want to tell me no, no, no. So I just want you to keep that in mind when you discuss this amongst yourselves. And with all due respect, Miss Pearlie? Sorry, I didn't want to. So with all due respect, a storage trailer is called a dry box. It has no wheels on it. It's made for construction sites. That's not what I'm looking to do. That's not what I'm willing to do. And I'm willing to do whatever this board feels is reasonable and whatever's fair. And that's why I took my steps a month ago, and I took 3 of the largest trailers off the property, which were a landscape trailer, a similar trailer used for storage that's full of some furniture, and a boat trailer and a boat trailer. So I took those 3 off the property. They're on someone else's property for storage. But I'd like to have it for, the variance approved tonight for 4 trailers for storage along the property line of Wentworth Cove Road within the bush line, and come spring, part of the agreement or part of the approval of the variance would mean I would block the entire roadway in on Wentworth Cove Road with trees and bushes. 100%, I will block it in to prevent any of those from being seen, and I will even go a step further, and I'll put arborvitae trees, which are tall and thin, along part of Mr. Jennings Road, Mr. Jennings property line, so he doesn't have to see that section. I'd be willing to do that as well. I mean, I'm willing to help the committee make a proper decision in a fair decision, and I'm willing to help my neighbor with something fair and reasonable, and I'll spend the money to put them in if he didn't want to. I mean, he wants to block my view. He wants to block what he looks at. He should cover it up. I'm willing to spend the money. If he had told me that something of mine was 3 feet over the property line, I would have just moved it. I didn't know it was 3 feet over the property line, so I'm going to move that this week. There's something 3 feet over the line, but it's on my side of his bushes and everything else. So that's where I'm at. Thank you for your time. Any other questions?
That your closing?
It is, sir.
Okay, you may have a seat.
Thank you.
If there is no further questions, so, right? Was there any further questions? I forgot to ask. Okay, I'm gonna close it to the public and bring it to the board for discussion.
I still would like to know exactly about the 4 trailers, where they're gonna be, by seeing a site plan or by visiting the site and actually seeing what the plan is, and if they can successfully be screened, because from what I've seen in the past, they haven't been, so, but I know that things changed, and, but that's a good-sized lot. There have got to be options on that lot. And I don't know, it's 4 still is an unreasonable number, based on the neighborhood, so there's still some concerns. The fact that he has all this stuff, it's not our problem, it's his problem.
I don't know if this would be a possible answer too, but down on Route 3 going toward Tilton, on the left, there's a place down there that sells, they're like Quonset huts.
Oh, those canvas,
Seen those canvas?
the round things
Yeah,
like that?
would that be something that,
That would be, those aren't,
That's temporary buildings,
yeah,
so
that's
it'd be.
just as worse, that's just as bad. And probably not allowed.
So do I take the assumption that y'all are, because I hate assuming anything.
Well, I can't make a motion to approve something I don't have any specific information on. I want to know more.
So you want to continue a negotiation?
I would like to continue and ask the application to provide a site plan telling us exactly where these are going to go and showing
Well,
us options.
You
If
see,
there's options on the property.
here's in lying the problem. You can't talk anymore, please.
Approach?
Nope. You see, herein lies the problem, is the hardship. Okay, we have to, for you to get anywhere you want to go, you got to get over hardship. Okay, is there a hardship? Because the other's going to fall in line, and we have to determine, is there a hardship on that lot, 1 acre lot, that says he needs a variance and justified having a variance to put the trailers? Don't matter what the trailers are, put trailers in the front yard. Is there a hardship?
I don't see one.
I think what I see here on a nice lot that's right next to, Winnipesaukee, this is a high-vis piece of property, both from Summit Ave, over the bridge, from the water. A hardship there could be the amount of stuff that someone has there at a point, and it is an acre lot, once you impact it so much.
Now, keep in mind, if I may, we had some folks on South Main Street that wanted to put their camper in their driveway because their garage was too close to their house. And they were told, no, they couldn't keep their camper there. They could remove some of their garage and put their trailer in the backyard. Okay,
Precise.
so, once again, I ask about the hardship.
I mean, the hardship is self-inflicted. I mean,
No.
he's got more
Is
stuff
there
than he
an-
can store on his property.
Is there anything unique about that piece of property that is different than any other piece of property around them
That's the point.
that says he has to park his trailer there?
I don't know. And I think the property is unique because it is opened up on several sides. It's very visible. But the whole purpose of the ordinance is for the orderly development of the city of Laconia. And in that, in the shorefront district, we specifically say we don't want these things staring us in the face. So there's got to be on this lot some other configuration and some other placement that would help the neighbors and work with the homeowner.
That's the problem. It's an acre lot, but it's a flat lot. And there is no hardship in the land, and that's the problem that we have. If there was a brook running through the property, or if there was a rise, a little cliff that couldn't be
understand.
taken care of.
So you're saying he could put this storage place, bins other places on the lot?
Right, I'm saying there's no hardship in the land.
There is a backyard, and as much as I hate to say that, because it's beautiful on the waterfront and everything, but there is a backyard. So, to say we don't have a backyard is a reason for a hardship, we can't say that. So that's why we gotta get the hardest one fixed first, and then you work yourself backwards, if that's what you want to determine. But currently, the hardship is, I don't,
I'm not seeing the hardship as a factor of the land itself or the lot itself. We're talking about storing, personally, more things than I'd want in my own front yard. You know,
now, a hardship could be, we would have to get a determination from our attorney, which I would be amenable to, is the hardship is the fact that I might be grasping and reaching, but a hardship could be the fact that he did request to build a garage so that he could put his stuff in it and has a permit standing with the city of Laconia, if I'm not mistaken, and his homeowners association has denied him the rights of being able to build this garage, which would have allowed him to store his
valuables.
valuables.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, but that's just inaccurate.
Please,
I don't
Please.
want you starting off on a wrong assumption, that's just inaccurate. You have permission to build the garage.
sir,
are
there
conditions.
is no input.
Well, then we've been given bad information. So we're stuck.
So you want me to reopen it back up and we can discuss this? I'll be happy to reopen it back up.
No, it's
I don't mind.
a long meeting.
Because
But I
if
do
we've
have a-
crossed into it, because if I'm given inaccurate information, then I want to make sure the assumptions we have are correct. So, is it mind if I,
Then if you open it back up, you'll open it back up to everybody. We'll be here another hour. I mean, maybe we just should get legal counsel to weigh in and table it till the next meeting and ask for a site plan and maybe do a site, I mean, there are options. I'm in no position whatsoever. I mean, does he have the right to have a trailer on his property? Sure, but.
in his backyard?
Yeah. 4 trailers? No.
In his backyard.
And without seeing the site and exactly now, because everything's changed, he's moved the ones that I thought we were talking about, everything's changed. I would like a site plan to show where he wants to put these things and how he proposes to screen them. to see if we even want to go that far. But maybe we don't even want to go that far. I don't know. I'm stuck.
About this screening, there's certainly two sides to this property that would accept a fence or a fence-bush combination. I like bushes, but eventually they mature and everything down low falls off.
Well, we
You
can,
don't want big nasty pines all over your property because they fall down and create a heck of a mess to clean up.
yeah, that sap is not good.
Yep.
Do y'all want to do a site visit? The daylight is a little longer nowadays, and it's starting to get a little warmer and warmer.
I'd do it for a discussion.
You know, we can open up the meeting, reopen the meeting there so that we can have a discussion there, we can talk there, and we can,
See if there
we've
are
done this
options.
with a deck before, so
yeah.
we were able to come to some kind of thing. So, is that what y'all would like to do?
Sure, I'll buy into that.
But in the meantime, I would also like clarification on the garage issue. If it's an option,
Well,
if it's ever gonna happen, can it ever happen?
well, that's something we can ask, because I'm gonna have to open it back up if we have a site meeting.
Okay.
All right, so we can continue the meeting at the site, and we gotta figure out what date y'all would wanna do that. You wanna do it before the next meeting?
Yes.
And that way we can ensure that it's gonna get a little warmer, and we can say we can meet there at 6 o'clock, if that's
The day of the meeting?
the day of the meeting.
Sure.
And that way it'll give us a half hour there, and then a half hour to come back here and reopen the meeting. So we're gonna, on the day of the meeting at 6 o'clock, we'll meet there at the property. We can open up the meeting so that we can have free, unfeathered discussion.
April 16th.
And we can have discussion with the folks that are there. The abutters are welcome to come over. Everybody can talk,
Yep,
okay?
been there before.
The association is welcome to be there. We can all talk and see what's what.
What time?
6 o'clock.
So, I'm gonna open it back up.
At Holmesy's place.
We're gonna meet at your place, 6 o'clock,
April 16th. April 16th.
April 16th at 6 o'clock. And that way, it's gonna be an open meeting. It will be in a meeting. And that way, everybody can come and welcome. If you will invite us onto your property. And then we can see what we can see and whatnot. Then we'll bring it back here and close out the meeting with it. Okay?
Agreed. Thank you.
Okay. So, with that, I make a motion, we continue this to April 16th at 6 o'clock at a site visit.
And I second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so be it.
Okay, and at this point, Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna leave the meeting.
You take your time.
Okay, thank you.
And thank everybody for showing up and see everybody who was here on the 16th. Okay? All right.
Daisy Gardner.
Okay, next on the agenda is,
Daisy Gardner. Daisy Gardner.
Daisy Gardner. Okay, this is another one we've graciously been allowed to move to the appropriate time. So, I'm going to open this up. Application 2017-0028, 145 Daisy Gardner Road. They're requesting a variance equitable waiver. Applicant seeks a variance for the use of storage containers in an RR1 zone and a variance equitable waiver for the front setback.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm Attorney Phil Brouillard. I appear here tonight with Dennis and Linda Wright, who are right beside me. And basically, the chairman is correct. We're here to actually, we're here to ask for actually two variances, but in the event the board wanted to grant an equitable waiver rather than a variance for setback, I've gone through those criteria as well. Basically, what happened was in 2014, Linda and Dennis, having a farm, needed space undercover for a tractor and other equipment that they use to mow their fields and also some fields for the state. In total, they mow their own property, which is 6 acres, and they also mow 8 acres on behalf of the state. They have a very large tractor with a big mower on the back and an enclosed cab. So since they have a house with an attached garage and a barn building, they wanted only a temporary structure so it could be removed in the future if they move or stop farming. The temporary structure consists of 2 storage containers. These are the so-called shipping type containers that are 8 feet tall by 8 feet wide by 40 feet long. And the 2 storage containers are connected with a plastic roof system that Roland was talking about before, that spans the 2 containers. So it makes like a temporary building. The storage containers are being used as support walls, a component of a roof that is attached, which by definition makes these storage containers a structure or a building which would need to meet the 40-foot setback from the property line as provided in Article 6, Section 2.35-35A, Table 2. On April 14th, 2014, Linda Wright called the planning office, explained the temporary structure that they wished to erect, and was told that temporary structures were allowed. Steve, the former code enforcement officer, inspected the temporary structure on May 30th, 2014, and noted it had no permanent foundation. In August of 2014, Chris Snow, predecessor to Rob, acting on a complaint from a shorefront seasonal owner who drives by the property, questioned the home occupation that was being conducted on the property, and after further inspection, that was resolved to the city's satisfaction. It seems that during the summer, when seasonal out-of-town non-resident property owners are driving Daisy Gardner Road, they make complaints to the city manager and planning director, who sent Rob, zoning technician, to the property for an inspection on July 26, 2017. During this site visit, it was determined that the property is in violation of 2 provisions of the zoning ordinance stated in this application: storage containers and front setback. Storage containers are not allowed in the RR1 zone, but are allowed in other zones in the city. And the temporary building needs to be 40 feet from the property line. Regarding the property line, the structure is located 43 feet and 47 feet, respectively, from Daisy Gardner Road's paved edge, which is where the Wrights measured from when erecting the temporary structure and placing the storage containers. Unfortunately, there's a curve in Daisy Gardner Road which moves the actual property closer to the temporary structure than 40. It's very, very close. I asked Rob before tonight's meeting if he remembered, and he said it's just a few, it's very close. It's 39, 38, 37, 30. It's very close to 40. Not 40, but very close. This was a simple good faith error in measurement that was not discovered until July 26, 2017, over 3 years after the temporary structure was erected and inspected by the city. It is important to note that the temporary structure is actually 43 feet and 47 feet, respectively, from the closest edge of Daisy Gardner Road. The other thing that the board needs to know is there's a very, very thick buffer between the road and the storage container. And when it's all foliated, you can barely see it. The storage containers are beige, and they do blend in. And also, that particular area of Daisy Gardner Road is on a curve. So the natural tendency for a driver would be to look down the road, going around the corner looking at the road. It wouldn't be to look over and say, gee, that's a storage container. Those are the facts. And I'm going to have Linda speak a little bit about what her experience was when she was trying to get this approval, talk about this approval with the city in 14, and then I'll go through the zoning criteria.
Good evening. As Phil mentioned, in April of 2014, inquiring about putting up a temporary structure, I called the planning office, talked to Kalina at the time, explained to her the type of structure we wanted to put up, and she said that was approved and that no permit was necessary. So, condensed version, the code enforcement officer came out in May of 2014, took pictures of the structure, documented my notation of who, when I called the planning department, and actually mentioned to me, you might want to consider anchoring those containers, because at the time in 2014 they were allowed. Going forward, it wasn't until we received the letter dated July of 2017, over 3 years later, that we were surprised that we were in violation. Because at the time of the visit of the code enforcement officer in 2014, I said at his conclusion of his visit, I said, will we get notified that everything's okay? And he said, no, just no news is good news. So that was great. 3 years later, no news was good news until we received the letter. So in error, we measured from the pavement edge and not from the property line, that since the road goes to a curve. And I did want to note that any abutters that can see the structure is the only abutter is our son across the street, and he has no issue with the building staying where it is. It would be a hardship to even try to move the building to be in compliance with the few feet we needed for the 40-foot setback. The property is not level. It would take considerable site work to make it level, plus we have some wetlands consideration to move that. So we ask that you consider the variance that we're requesting. Thank you.
This property sort of has a plateau, and then it drops into a wetland, and then there's a garden, and the rest of it's all grass, and then there's an electric transmission line that runs right through it. So the location of this building is really ideal as far as not causing any environmental damage, allowing the aquifer and the wetlands to recharge. The lawn and the property is manicured to perfection. The farm equipment is kept in the building. Farming is allowed in that zone. This is the criteria for the equitable waiver for the 40-foot setback. The violation was not noticed by a municipal official until July 26, 2017, over 3 years after a structure in violation had been substantially completed. In fact, the city planning inspector inspected the temporary structure on May 30, 2014 and August 14 by zoning technician Chris Snow, and no violation of setback was noted. Incidentally, it's very difficult to calculate how far that building is from the actual property line. Perhaps you could ask Rob, when you're asking questions, what he had to go through to do it, which he had the assistance of a lot of high-tech equipment to be able to do it, and it's sort of beyond what a normal homeowner or even a normal contractor would do to try to site these containers. The violation was not an outcome or ignorance of the law or ordinance, failure to inquire, misrepresentation or bad faith on behalf of the owner, but was in fact caused by a good faith error in measurement made by the owner. The owner mistakenly measured from the road, not the property line. And since it's on a curve, the property line is a little bit closer than 40 feet to the temporary structure. The dimensional violation does not constitute a public or private nuisance, nor diminish the value of other property in the area, nor interferes or adversely affects any present or permissible future use of the property. Also, the owner's son lives across the street and the property is surrounded by the state forest. Due to the degree of past construction or investment made and ignorance of the facts constituting the violation, the cost of correction so far outweighs any public benefit to be gained that it would be inequitable to require the violation to be corrected. I'm next going to address the Article 6, Section 2.35-35A, Table 2, 40-foot setback in the RR zone. Please forgive any repetition, but the factual circumstances are very similar. The variance will not be contrary to the public interest. Granting this variance would not be contrary to the public interest because the property is already developed and has frontage along Daisy Gardner Road. The site is flat, is in very good shape and very usable, and provides a suitable location for storage purposes. The temporary structure is located 43 feet and 47 feet from the side of the road and does not obstruct the road in any way. There is also a very thick screening along the road, and the building is in a hollow. In other words, it drops down, the land drops down from the road, and that's where the building is located. The spirit of the ordinance is observed since the property is located 43 feet and 47 feet from the road. It does not unduly and in a marked degree conflict with the Laconia zoning ordinance because containers are allowed by the ordinance, and it does not violate the ordinance's basic zoning objectives. Granting this variance would not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or locality and would not threaten the public health, safety, or welfare. In fact, nothing would change as a result of granting this variance. Substantial justice is done. The owners can make reasonable use of their property and store their farm equipment in this rural zone. Perhaps the only guiding rule on substantial justice is that any loss to the individual is not outweighed by a gain to the general public. I submit to you that the loss to the rights would be grossly out, but would not have any effect on the gain to the general public. In other words, the general public would gain nothing from not granting this variance. In this case, there's no harm to any abutter. There's no evidence that this variance will harm any land, wetland, aquifer, and granting the variance encourages a reasonable use of the property considering its location. The value of surrounding properties are not diminished because adequate landscaping and improvements to the property are in place. The nearest house is almost 100 feet away from the property and is across the street and looks directly at least a 25-foot buffer of trees. That house is owned by the Wright's son, and he's in favor of this application. Literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance result in an unnecessary hardship due to the special conditions of the property due to slope and farming areas, wetlands, and electrical transmission lines. There's simply really no other place to put this property where it wouldn't do some damage to the environment that it does not do exactly where it's located. Variances are being requested to enable the applicant's use of the property due to special conditions of the property. The special circumstances and condition is that the land slopes to the rear, and the area where the temporary storage garage is located is the only flat area that does not impact fields, farmland, wetlands, and land under electrical transmission lines. The next section is the storage containers in the RR1 zone. Article 7, Section 235-43, capital E, number 1. The variance will not be contrary to the public interest. Granting this variance would not be contrary to the public interest because the property is already developed and has frontage on Daisy Gardner Road. The site is flat, is in very good shape, and very usable, and provides a suitable location for storage purposes. The closest container component of the temporary structure is located 43 feet from the asphalt of the road and does not obstruct the road in any way. There is also a thick screening along the road, shielding the container component closest to the road. The trailer component is in a hollow. The spirit of the ordinance is observed since those storage containers are limited to those 8 feet high, such as the containers in issue. They are obstructed from view by large vegetative buffer of year-round vegetation screen that is over 25 feet thick. No abutter can see the containers from their properties except applicant's son across the street. This variance does not unduly and in a marked degree conflict with the Laconia zoning ordinance and does not violate the ordinance basic objectives of screening. Also, these storage containers are allowed in many zones. Granting this variance would not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or locality and would not threaten the public health, safety, or welfare. In fact, nothing would change as a result of granting this variance. The containers are components of the temporary structure and not standalone containers. 3, substantial justice is done. The owners can make reasonable use of their property and store their farm equipment in this rural zone to house their farm equipment. And perhaps the only guiding rule on substantial justice would be that the loss to the owners would far exceed any gain to the general public. I think that's something that should be considered by the vote of the board tonight. In this case, there is no harm to any abutter. There is no evidence that this variance will harm any land, wetland, or aquifer, and granting the variance encourages a reasonable use of the property considering its location. The value of surrounding properties are not diminished because adequate screening, landscaping, and improvements to the property. The nearest houses are almost 100 feet away from the property, and I believe that there's some people that are going to testify tonight that are almost 1.5 miles away from the property. The nearest home belongs to the owner's son across the street and is well screened from the road. Literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would result in an unnecessary hardship due to the special conditions of the property due to slope, farming area, wetlands, and electrical transmission lines. Variances are being requested to enable the applicant's use of the property due to special conditions of the property. The special conditions and circumstances is that the land slopes to the rear and the area where the temporary storage structure is located is the only flat area that does not in fact fields, farmland, wetlands, and land under electrical transmission lines. The same benefit cannot be achieved by some other reasonably feasible method that would not impose an undue financial burden or hardship. And thank you for listening to all that. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, and the rights are right here to answer any other questions.
The structure in question, is the shipping container here with this roof structure being put on top of it?
That's correct.
Okay. And what is the height at its highest point?
32.
Question.
This is what it looks like from the road.
When someone says they're gonna put a temporary structure up, how temporary is a temporary structure? Is there a time limit to how long, or is it indefinitely temporary?
It's,
If I asked that correctly.
you did ask that correctly, and it's a good question, and it's a difficult answer. We in the zoning ordinance do not define temporary. We don't have a definition for temporary structure. We just have a definition for structure. So that's, from a zoning standpoint, that's the definition that we're using. However, the International Building Code, of which we have adopted, does define temporary structures. And it gets a little bit subjective when you get into specifics of one structure versus, one temporary structure versus another temporary structure. But if you were to buy one of those, as Roland was alluding to earlier, if you were to buy one of those canvas, rhino shelter type thing that's got a metal frame that you kind of just place on the ground and maybe put some cement blocks on the bottom frame to keep it from blowing away, that would be a temporary structure because it's not permanently affixed to the ground. Our definition is permanently fixed to the ground is a structure, period. We don't define temporary or otherwise. In this case, my opinion, because I'm both the zoning and planning and also code enforcement, but my opinion is this is not a temporary structure. There's nothing temporary about this structure from a standpoint of it is not readily movable, and the applicant's attorney has stated that it's to move this structure would
Part of their hardship argument
right.
is
To
that
move this structure would require considerable site work and a lot of equipment in order to move the structure. So from my personal standpoint, my opinion is it's not a temporary structure. It's a structure that has been constructed out of different elements that have been combined together to create a structure. And part of that element is the storage trailers that are also singled out in our zoning ordinance that are not allowed in the RR zone. I don't know if
to
that
go with
answered your
that,
question.
well, yeah, because it kind of leads me into, I've watched TV shows, storage shelter homes, where they've literally taken storage shelters like these and made
Right.
a $500,000 home out of them. And so that's why I'm, where does the line draw between, because would that be a temporary structure house? Or do we define temporary structure as a non-livable item, or is a temporary structure livable? Because
I don't think there's a distinction between living in or not living in when it comes to structure. It's whether it's permanently affixed to the ground or not. That's our definition of a structure under the zoning
And
ordinance.
as for temporary or not, to me, the question would arise is and I think somebody alluded to it, was how temporary
It's
is
temporary.
time,
it's time.
in terms of time.
I have a question.
It's temporary.
Is this structure put together with rivet bolts or with welds?
Both.
Both? Not that it makes any difference. I'm just wondering if it had to be taken down, it would be easier if it had been built with bolts and
Now, back to plan, forgive me for a minute, I'm trying to get some things clarified in my head.
Certainly.
Per section 235-43 E1. Okay,
That's the storage container.
so the storage containers are allowed in a RR1 or are not?
No.
They are in CR.
Where
it's
does
CR and
it
C.
say, does it say somewhere where it's not allowed in a rural?
In the table of uses, I believe.
Will
it shows
uses,
that.
yes.
You have to go back several pages.
You got to keep in mind, the Laconia zoning ordinance is written in such a manner that we grant permission to do certain things. If it is not explicitly granted, it's not allowed.
Storage containers.
People like to think New Hampshire's a right to property rights state. It is not.
Once this storage container has been modified, to the extent it is modified, is it now a storage container, or is it a quasi carport? I'm sorry to ask these questions,
No,
but
you're right, no.
it's because we've now taken something
in this
and
case-
modified it
right, well-
into something that's something different than what,
The way that I look at this particular situation, I don't, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that the storage containers themselves have been modified, other than that they are being used as part of the structure, and the canvas metal frame part of the structure is somehow attached to them.
okay.
That would be correct, and it is probably more than it's more like a carport than it's,
The overall structure is,
It's kind of like a carport stuck on top of the.
yeah, it's like an airport hangar almost.
yeah.
But the.
Storage containers are, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but the storage containers are acting as, not only are they acting as storage for the rights, equipment and supplies and things of that nature inside the storage containers, but they're also acting as the walls, the first floor wall, if you will, of the structure.
If storage containers in an RR zone are not allowed, why are we here?
There, because we sent them, and we got a complaint, as was at least in the written, and I believe Attorney Williard mentioned, is a person driving by, who drives by often, particularly in the summer months, complained about the storage trailers. But they're not permitted in an RR zone, so therefore, the complaint was a legitimate complaint, and we did follow up
Are
on
they
that.
permitted by special exception? I didn't look.
No.
No,
permitted
they're
by-
not permitted.
Then they're not permitted by variance
So.
either.
Oh, yeah, you
cannot-
could.
Would be
So
permitted by
I
variance.
have to go back to one step further. If they're not permitted and not permitted by special exception, then we cannot give a variance to a setback on something that's not permitted.
We'd have to give a variance to the containers first, which we could do. That's why. if
But
it's
they're not permitted,
but
so
it-
they
but
can't
that's-
be there.
No, but that's why if it's not permitted, that's why the applicant comes before you to ask for a variance, to ask for permission. I mean, that N means no, it's not permitted, and then and this, I actually had to have Rod explain this to me. Then the applicant, knowing that it is not permitted, then comes in and seeks a variance to have it allowed. That N means you have to come for a variance. You can't come for a special exception. You have to come for a variance.
But we're not talking about a variance
Well-
for containers tonight.
But
We're
they do.
asking for.
There is a.
It's actually
there
like
is.
it's
There
like
are
a
two
two-part
variances.
variance
Yeah, it's a
request.
two-part variance.
Yeah,
And-
that's
and-
Appendix D asks for a
and-
variance for the storage containers in our.
And to answer Roland's question, my client was told that they explained what they were gonna do, and they did it. And the city inspected it at least twice, and nobody said anything in 2014.
In 2014, we were told we could have the containers. We specifically asked.
And that would be the basis for
The
the
hardship.
equitable waiver.
Right.
But if, otherwise, it's the basis, it's part of the basis for the hardship, and I can understand that. But yeah, there are two variances being requested. One is for the storage containers, which are not allowed, and so you need the variance. And then the variance for the setback. Or, in the alternative, if I'm seeing this correctly, it's an equitable waiver based on the fact that they were placed in good faith, being told by the city that they were acceptable in 2014. And then the variance would be for the setback.
This is correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Is that
I didn't
about-
understand that either.
Okay.
I did have.
Yeah,
to
no,
go.
you have to, I would suggest to the board, the first thing to resolve is whether you're going to give a variance for storage container or not. And if you do, then the second question of the distance becomes whether you want to do an equitable waiver of dimensions or whether you want to do a variance for the dimension.
Because you
Either
don't
or.
give a variance for the setback.
Right, if the use is not
They can't.
correct,
Right,
yes,
exactly.
yes.
That's what I was
Yep.
trying to
Yep.
go down the path.
Dean,
All
was
right,
it legal?
now I got that cleaned up in my head, thank you.
In 2014, was it legal to have a storage container?
I don't believe there's been any change in the last 4 years in that matter. I don't have an
Was it
explanation.
a mistake by a city employee that said it's okay to have it?
It could have been a mistake, it could have been an oversight, it could have been, and maybe something did change, but I don't see any documentation in the zoning ordinance that
Did they say
states
it in
that
writing?
that kind of thing.
Did
Yeah,
the
we-
city, I'm sorry, did the city employees say it in writing that they could have this in 2014, or was it a word of mouth?
No, my client called up to see if she needed a building permit. She was told she didn't need a building permit because it was a temporary building.
Yeah.
And she explained how the building was to be constructed. And the employee said, you don't need a permit. So they built it, and they had Steve come out and inspect it, and he didn't say anything about the containers. And then Steve came back, and then Chris Snow went out there in 2014 in August, and she didn't say anything about the containers. And then all of a sudden, we were here last year.
Why would we, if I may ask, why would we call the city to inspect something you didn't need a permit for? That intrigues me.
Because they didn't know, and they wanted to be sure they did it properly.
In May 30th, when Steve came out, he took pictures, documented my notes, who I had talked to, and even told me I might want to consider securing the containers. So the containers were in place, and the hoop structure was being put up, and that's when he had come out to inspect it.
got circulated.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I don't have any at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to open it to the public and ask if anybody from the public wishes to speak for or against this application. Please come forward at this time and introduce yourself for the record.
Mr. Chairman, Board, my name is Dave Gresky, who have lived full-time on Layton Ave, yes, at the other end of Layton Ave, for 14 years. And we're very concerned about the change to the neighborhood from being a farm area where the applicants own property to being turned into a commercial area if these two variances go through. I'm here tonight as a homeowner. There's nothing personal here. I love the neighborhood. We love the farm, but we love the farm as a farm. What I'd like to be able to do is walk through and comment on each of these different items. In their application, they said in their first couple of paragraphs, in 2014, the Wrights having a farm needed space under cover for a tractor and other equipment, which they used to mow their fields and also plow the state fields. The tractor and the implements are used for farm purposes and growing of crops. Since the Wrights have a house with an attached garage and a barn building, they wanted only a temporary structure so it can be removed in the future if they move or stop farming. Well, we all know that once you get a variance, it doesn't go by name, it goes by property. So if they decided not to farm or whatever and they had the variance and they sold the property down the road, new people would come in and the variance goes with the deed. It doesn't go with a name. The information, excuse me. In reality, the applicants are operating a home business. And it consists of 2 or 3 commercial cranes, 2 of which are parked in there tonight. This is why Chris Snow came out and whatever, but we'll get into all of that.
Actually, I object to this.
Wait a minute.
Sir, he does get an opportunity to speak, and you'll have a chance to speak again.
I just want the board to understand the relevance. We're here for 2 variances. What he's talking about, we're not.
Please.
I think this is very important for the board, the zoning board, to understand, because it impacts the reason for the hut being 32 feet high. Farming equipment, you don't need 32 foot high to drive a tractor in and put it under. But you do need a lot of height to move commercial cranes in and out of there. So they're stored in this temporary hut, if you want to call it that, and they're used as needed, whether it's during the day, every day, or twice a week or whatever. The first concern is they're operating a home business which is supposed to be transparent. When you get a home business permit, the word transparency is very clear. It wasn't too many years back that there was a person looking for a variance who was a photographer and wanted to have the word photographer put above his mailbox along with his name, and he was denied the variance because it wasn't transparent. The home business wasn't transparent. So I don't see how this is running that home business is transparent for the neighborhood as they're moving this property, these units on and off the street as much as daily. I don't believe they meet the definition of transparency. Second, as stated in the application, the structure is a temporary structure. Now we can, if you go out and you purchase one of those, they're sold as a temporary structure. And by definition of temporary, you can dismantle it, move it, and reassemble it by definition. The property, based on the application that I read months ago, consists of 9.69 acres of land. And I'm sure all 9.69 acres are not pristine and all buildable. But I would find it hard to believe that if you have a temporary structure that's somewhere in the vicinity, and I'm going to say it's about 30 by 40, that you couldn't find a 30 by 40 section of land on 9.69 acres to put a, quote, temporary structure and not have to request a variance and still be within code. Variances, by my understanding, are a last resort item. When you have exhausted everything else, then you go for a variance. Number 3, the storage containers are not legal, and if they needed more storage space, they could build a storage unit somewhere on that 9.69 acres of land. By the applicant's submission, on April 14th, they called the planning office to find out about the temporary structure and were told they could do it. And in August, Chris Snow, acting on a complaint from a shorefront seasonal owner, questioned the home occupation that was being conducted on the property. That's why Chris Snow went to the property. She went to the property not because that there was one seasonal person. There were many people on Layton Ave North and South that were complaining and went down to see Chris Snow and Shanna because there was a home business being operated on there, and they asked the question, has this been permitted? And the answer is no. And we asked to see what the requirements were for home occupancy. And there's many of them. I think there's 14 requirements. But the transparency one stood right out. So that was part of the reason why she went there. And there were many complaints. It wasn't just one seasonal person who was upset over it. I disagree that the home occupation business, the home business occupation has been resolved. There were a couple of things that happened. Chris Snow retired, and Shanna took a new job in Portsmouth as a planning director. And we were told they were working with the applicants to try to resolve this, which included storing those cranes in another section other than on their property, not on their property, some other place in town or whatever. And they were working towards that. I don't know if the permit has ever been issued or not. If it has been issued, fine. Then we'll look at transparency and the other 13 items that go along with that to see if we're abiding by it. But the reason for that hut is to store items that are significantly higher and wider than farm equipment. And there's not one, there's at least two, I'm not sure if there's three. Regarding the, how they answer the items on the variance requirements, I disagree that there is thick screening there. The containers are very visible when you drive by, whether you go around a corner or not. They're very, very, in fact, I believe the application says there's 25 feet of thick screening there year-round. Well, I wouldn't expect to see it there during the hard months of the winter, but you would expect to see that there 25 feet year-round. And I believe there are pictures that show differently. It does alter the essential characteristic of the neighborhood. Farm equipment is significantly different than commercial cranes. We're talking cranes that, and I'm no crane person, but I think there's one is a 100-ton crane. I could be wrong on the size of that, but they're not small pieces of equipment. They're huge pieces of equipment. As the structure is temporary, it should be moved to code. We disagree about the screening. And yes, I fail to understand the hardship. When you have 9.69 acres of land, you're talking a temporary structure. You can, by definition, you can move it. And on 9.69 acres of land, you should be able to find a 30 by 40 area to put that in. In my opinion, it doesn't meet the hardship. It's definitely out of character with a neighborhood. It's a nice farm. It's a very nice farm, and they maintain the property very nicely. But when you add 2 or 3 cranes to it, going back and forth and running it as a business, it takes away the farm, and it turns it into a commercial piece of property, in my opinion. The proposed location is not appropriate. It can easily be moved to meet code. The 2 storage containers do not meet code, and if you need that much more storage, put up a storage building somewhere on the 9.69 that's within code. And it does constitute a public nuisance, and it may not affect the present owner that lives across the street that is their son, but if they decided to move, or if the son decided to move and sell the property, it now becomes a nuisance to the new owners to hear these big diesel pieces of equipment starting up early in the morning to leave the property to go off to a job. In summary, there's three main issues. Operating a home business, not being transparent, and using the temporary structure to store 2 or more commercial-grade cranes. 2, if the unit is indeed temporary, then by definition, it can be moved to another area and be within code. As I said before, a variance should be the last option if there are no workarounds. 3, if the applicant requires more storage, instead of a variance for containers, which does not meet the hardship clause, build again the storage unit on the 9.69. And again, it does significantly impact the characteristics of the neighborhood. It definitely does take the farm aspect away and turns it into these commercial cranes. It doesn't meet the requirements for the variance, and operating the home business does not meet the requirement of the home business permit. Hardship's not realized, changes the characteristics. I would not support either variance, and I ask the board to consider doing the same. Any comments or questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public wish to speak for or against this application, please come forward.
Good evening, thank you for your time. My name's Art Abelman. I've lived on Layton Ave, now called Layton Ave North, for nearly 25 years. I am a neighbor of Dave's. This situation has quite a back story, and I'd rather not go back there. I'm more than happy to, because I think it builds to where we are. But the words good faith have come up here in the application and in the attorney's presentation. The very first line of the application throws out the whole good faith piece. And I believe you have a copy of 6 items that should have been presented to you in your packets, along with some photographs. I believe you have the photographs, if I'm not mistaken. I'd like to read those 6 items, particularly as to how they pertain to the application, and then maybe go back a little bit and point out some other things, if I may. In paragraph 1 of the Appendix A, the applicant states needed undercover space for a tractor and other equipment which they use to mow their fields and also plow the state's fields. Tractors used for farm purposes and growing crops, and the use of let me just state it again, to store a tractor and other equipment. If you look at the photographs, it's pretty evident that the size of the 32-foot high Quonset hut is not a required or even a reasonable expectation to store a tractor, at least not a tractor for 9 acres and the mowing of the state fields across the street on the state forest. So the reality on that particular situation is that, let's call it what it is. It wasn't built for a tractor. In fact, rarely is the tractor in it. And I would have thought that the Wrights would have been smart enough over the course of this experience to not put non-tractor heavy equipment, i.e. 90-ton cranes, in the unit, which I see numerous times each day as I drive by. The Quonset hut was built with storage containers solely for the purpose of holding on to the cranes undercover. That's the reality. Let's call it what it is. Let's get out of the good faith. Let's be realistic. That's why they built it the way they did. The storage containers, you don't need storage containers for farm equipment of that capacity. Those are there for storage of equipment that has to do with the operating of the cranes. Some of the photographs point to that, and I'd be happy to share more. Paragraph 2 of Appendix A, the applicant refers to the structure as temporary. There is no classification of temporary in the city of Laconia. There's no definition, there's no classification. We've been told that tonight. I don't know how they can consider it temporary if there's no such thing as a temporary structure. If it is temporary, by definition of temporary in common sense language, it can be taken down and moved. If they want to call it temporary, which they do, take it down, move it, and build it appropriately for the storage of a small tractor. The issue is, do we need the storage containers there? RR1 clearly says, absolutely not. There's no hardship. They don't need them for the storage of a tractor, which is what they asked for. They shouldn't even be there. We shouldn't even be here based on that fact alone. Mr. Wright confirmed that the roof is in fact welded, which does take it more from a temporary, undefined, to a permanent. Now we've got storage containers that are permanent. So again, I don't see any hardship there if what we're truly doing is building a structure to store a tractor. Item 3 is repetitive of what I just said. The fact that it was built not for a tractor, when we're getting realistic, is why Mr. Gresky got into the notion of the home business. That's truly why this is there. If they wanted a 32-foot high structure, they didn't need storage containers to build it 32 feet high. They could use the numerous types of structural framing to build their canopy on top of, which in fact it's not even designed to have it. That's not how those units are designed. That's not their intended purpose or use. Again, why 32 feet? Why the containers? It's got nothing to do with a farm tractor. Hardship. Definitely a 9-acre lot. It's gently sloping. There's wetlands as has been permitted, or has been referred to. There is power lines. That's an issue as well. But there's plenty of space on that property to put together some type of a storage facility for a tractor. It doesn't have to be that big. Ironically, the Wrights do have an attached 2-car garage to their home, but they also have a barn that they have renovated properly, permitted, but that barn is used to house another crane. If the commercial crane wasn't on the property, that barn would be substantially capable of holding onto the farm tractor. However, since it's filled with a commercial crane, they needed the other unit for more cranes and claim it's for a farm tractor. There's discussion about a curve in the road. And Daisy Gardner, coming down off Meredith Center onto Layton Ave North and Layton Ave South, it's kind of a funny way it works. One road kind of melds into the other. The plot plan that they provided does not show where the actual structure is. But if you look at an aerial view, you can see where the structure is, and you can see that it's actually parallel, perfectly parallel to Daisy Gardner Road, because there is no curve in the area where that unit is built. So as far as curvature goes, I don't see it. And I can document that and show it to you easily. When it comes to character of the neighborhood, and I think the neighborhood does include Daisy Gardner, it does include Layton Ave North, it does include Layton Ave South, and I'd go far as to say it even includes Collinsbrook Road a little bit, which is in Laconia, but it does loop back out to Meredith Center, so it's sort of one giant area. Swain State Forest does abut the property. I don't believe that Swain State Forest was dedicated to be there so that a Quonset hut of the size could be built so commercial cranes could now be operated, and those using the forest, those living in the forest, the habitat of the forest, not necessarily conducive character-wise to what the Wrights are currently using their property for. I could go on to other ways that it's detrimental, but that is one of the requirements to prove the hardship, is that there is no character change to the community or the neighborhood. I don't specifically recall which photographs you have, but one of the interesting things is that more often than not, the tractor is actually stored behind the house, not in the unit that they built. This photograph demonstrates that. I think you might have that. I'm not sure. I'm more than happy to hand it to you. Dave Goreski mentioned the idea of this 25-foot buffer, and I can show you that in full foliage, when trees are totally leaved, this thing is highly visible. The containers are highly visible. They're not covered in a way that you cannot see them. Other photographs demonstrate the fact that there is other heavy equipment on the property, and there's implements not for the tractor, but rather for the cranes. It's not unusual to see the crane in use on the property. Again, just simply points out the fact that that's not what this facility was built for. Also the same. In the non-foliage season, this thing is highly visible. Again, in the foliage, it's visible. Foliage, it's visible. So let's go back to the two main reasons why we're here. One is the storage container, and the other is the setback. We can't go back to conversations that took place between people who are no longer employed here, and there's nothing in writing about that. Again, call it what it is. This is not meant or intended for a farm tractor. This is intended for the storage of commercial buildings, commercial vehicles. The largest type commercial crane that you can put on the road without a permit. Going up and down Daisy Gardner Road, which was not built to have that kind of capacity. In fact, the safety guards, the guardrails on that road, predate any of us because they're simply old telephone poles with cable, many of which have fallen apart because the road itself is falling to disrepair, mostly because of the weight of equipment that comes up and down that road. So I have these photographs if you want them. I'm more than happy to show you that there is no curvature in the road where they talk about having to measure or mismeasure the setbacks. I reemphasize the notion that if we're going to call it what it is in good faith, I wish that people would do so and not try to misrepresent or deceive, especially when it's blatantly obvious. And if it's temporary, take it down and move it and build something for your tractor. Get the storage containers out of there. They're not permitted no matter what. That's what the RR1 restriction is. If it's permanent, call it that. Again, permanent or not permanent, the trailers are not, storage containers are not permitted. And if you want a permanent structure for your farm tractor, build such a thing. If the cranes weren't on property, the barn would suffice for the tractor. It's not for me to say how Mr. and Mrs. Wright run their business. That's up to them. But I don't believe that they're using it in good faith as far as how they're making the property adhere to what is or is not a home business. I also think there's an issue with the taxes. If this building has been there, and we now call it permanent because of the welding, has it been assessed as such, and are the owners paying the appropriate taxes? Most of us on that road pay very high real estate tax to the city of Laconia. I've been told it's the largest amount of tax per linear foot in a residential neighborhood. If I'm paying my share, and we're going to call this a permanent building, let's have it assessed as such. And I don't say that against the rights. I say that for every property in the city, because my understanding, as it comes to my knowledge, is that there's plenty of these kind of situations where people have built so-called temporary structures, which changes the way they are assessed, when in fact they're permanent structures, which means that the tax revenue isn't there, impacting all of us by the fact that we still have to have that revenue come from somewhere. So I'm happy to share these other photographs. I can't remember what I've presented to the planning department that they passed out. And I'm happy to answer any questions and appreciate your time.
If you want to leave those photographs, they do, once he touches his hand, they remain with the city.
That's fine. Enjoy.
Did you see these?
They're this, right?
Yeah. I didn't get those. That's why I was curious.
Actually, if I could, I might like to add a few to those. And this isn't the kind of situation where you just catch the oddball chance of something being where it is on that particular time. I think we could go out there any day and see what Mr. Gresky referred to as even tonight on his way here. So. Anything else?
What was your name, sir? I missed it.
Art Abelman.
Is that it?
That's it from my point.
Okay.
Unless something else is said, and I feel like I'd like to comment on what's said, so leave that open if possible. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anybody else from the public wish to speak for or against this application? Please come forward at this time. At this time, let the minutes reflect no one else wish to speak for or against this application.
Before you close it to the public, sir, may I ask that should the right...
Please come up and speak into the microphone.
I said this in my closing, but again, before you close it to the public permanent, if the rights are going to come up and talk a little bit further, can I reserve the right to also talk further in that particular capacity or not?
Generally, no.
Okay.
Speaking, so
So I just hope that they will present something more, I don't want to be insulting, but in good faith than what the first sentence of their application says, which is this is supposed to be for a...
Okay, thank you very
Thank you.
much. With that, we're going to close it to the public and bring it back to the board. Any further questions of the applicant? Yes, I do. My curiosity is piqued. The application says farm equipment. Could you please expand what your definition of farm equipment is?
Well,
For the record.
there's a backhoe, a big tractor with a mower, a tiller,
Snow pusher,
snow pusher,
implements for the garden.
implements to rototill the garden.
Snow blower,
What?
snow blower,
Snow blower,
disc, plow.
disc harrow, plow.
So, have you had an opportunity to see the pictures?
No, not till we
That
started.
doesn't show
Well,
any of the above. Well, before you say it doesn't matter, and that's not what
No,
we're here for
there was-
tonight, please don't, because this is totally different than farm equipment.
well,
Because there's nothing farming here and that I'm aware of unless there's definitions I'm not.
well, there is farm equipment there. The pictures we took have a picture of the tractor in there.
Like that one? where it shows it's being parked behind the house?
No, if you look at my application, you'll see the tractor parked in the building.
Well, which also piques my interest, why do we need a 34-foot high building, 32 foot, I stand corrected for the record, 32 foot high to put a 12-foot high tractor in it? Which is actually designed to sit outside in the weather as farm equipment, so.
Well, that's what they thought.
For your picture.
That's what they thought they would need. One thing that I want to be clear about here is there was never any intention to deceive anybody. The size of these buildings was well disclosed. The city saw them, and there was no notice of that there was any violations for over 3 years. The other thing is, it's not a hidden fact that the Wrights aren't in the crane business. They have a crane in a barn. There's a crane that's, they have a slot 4 down at the BPS building. That's the bigger crane. But sometimes, depending on where the job is, it's too late and he parks the crane in his yard. But we worked with Mrs. Snow and the planning department on a home occupation, and we didn't feel that it was necessary because the cranes aren't there on a regular basis. They come and go. By their very nature, they go and lift stuff elsewhere. They are tested from time to time or lubricated, but it's very, very minimal, and there's no real work done on site.
They are serviced on site?
The reason it was particularly...
Serviced on site, then there's another issue, because they're not to be serviced, commercial equipment is not to be serviced on R1 site.
They don't, actually, I misspoke. They weren't servicing it that day, they were actually cutting down a tree.
So, what is the percentage? Well, let me ask. Do you store these cranes in that unit? It's a simple yes or no. Okay. Do we store cranes in the unit?
On occasion.
It's a yes or no?
On occasion.
Okay. So I'm gonna
But
take
not every night. There's a small crane that's in the barn every night, but it's in the barn.
When it's not on the job, is it stored in the
barn?
Is these cranes stored here when they're not on the job? Are these cranes that I see that are in this garage stored here?
We don't have, I haven't seen any of these pictures.
Please, please.
This one is in the...
That's when we were taking down the tree.
That's boom truck.
The one where the arm's extended up is not as much concern because it could be used in taking down a tree or something, but it's the rest of them showing that these are stored inside the unit.
This one is not stored inside the unit.
I understand, and that's the one I said was, but.
This is a boom truck, and it is stored inside the unit, but it's not technically a crane.
Okay.
Steve, can you pass those down, please?
Can I ask?
Please.
I just wanted to confirm, Mr. Rabelman said it was welded. I thought you said that it was bolted.
It's both.
Bolted.
Both.
Okay.
Yeah. And also, I think it's clear that we've proceeded in good faith. And also, as far as the 43 feet and the 47 feet, I measured that with the planning department personally and confirmed the exact measurements. So by that definition, there's some curve in that road, maybe very slight.
The variance is not much more that concerns me, is more of the storage units itself, and that's why I keep coming back, because
Well, I did say in my application that they're a component, and I think if you look at all,
we took that component out because you actually don't need 34 feet, 32 feet, I stand corrected again. To store a tractor, it's 12 feet high, and if that rounded ceiling was dropped to the ground, then you would still have an appropriate amount of height to store your farm equipment that you've discussed. In which case, then you would not need the variance for the storage trailers. And since we, honestly speaking, that we don't store cranes and the whatnot in it, that height would not be required. And then we wouldn't, once again, if that's the only level place that that rounded section could sit flat on the ground, then we could see asking for a variance, but the height of the 32 feet,
how high is the door?
14 feet.
By the container, which is 8 feet, it's almost twice that, so I'd say roughly 15 feet.
It's narrow.
What?
I told you, 14 feet.
The door opening is 14 feet, so if you took the 8 feet of the containers out, it would only be 6 feet, which wouldn't,
well, if that's an 8-foot
28,
container,
32.
you're 32 feet, you got 27 feet of something there, right?
When you build a barn, the cows go in the bottom, what goes in top?
That's more than 14 feet.
This isn't a barn.
I know, but it's in that
It's a
same-
storage unit for
Which-
something.
There's 8 acres I would like to farm with state forest, and I can hay that.
And I appreciate that, and we're trying to accommodate you being able to store your equipment for haying.
but you can't store hay without the storage containers.
The height.
No one's mentioned that we store hay, and I've never seen hay stored. Nowadays, I've seen them store hay in all kind of different methods and madness as I drive through all the rural lands of
All
America.
wrapped up in plastic and everything.
Yeah, and so I'm having a difficult time understanding the relationship of 32 feet for a tractor for haying and backhoes and stuff like that. I'm kind of familiar because I'm in this kind of line of work a little bit, and it's.
Well, I do want you to know that because of wind issues, that there's not, it doesn't go from the ground up to 32 feet. There's a door.
I understand. And it's temporary as the door, so the door could get modified.
I guess it could.
Okay, because if I'm not mistaken, that structure's all just wrought iron pipe of some type, tubed pipe and stuff like that. And they're designed for any height and whatnot one would wish, which could be accommodating to the height of a farming tractor.
Well, the board has great discretion into what variances and can put condition on variances it grants, so we would leave it in the board's good hands. I mean, the effect of denying the variance for the storage containers and granting the variance for the setback would do what you suggested, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
If the storage containers are denied because they're not allowed in RR1, there's no reason to be discussing setback, correct?
Well, it can be then, once they take it apart, they can move it to 2 feet, and they wouldn't even need the variance anymore. So it's.
Except that if the storage containers get denied, then they can't use them.
That's correct.
So they would
That
just be
the
setting
top
up.
portion would come down to the ground if they're using it for storage of farming equipment, and then as they're bringing it down, they can just kind of move it 2 feet over and problem solved.
Well,
How many bales of hay do you get when you hay annually?
When I do, there's about 200 bales that come off that field. You can do 2 cuttings a year.
Well, the reason we would like the setback is, one of the things we've said is that due to the area for the building was built up around the corner, and if we get any closer, we get into some of the area where the farm, and we start getting closer to the wetlands. So we would really like the variance for the setback as well, so that if we just remove the containers, the building would just come straight down.
And sit on that, the special area set up. I can understand that.
Is your prime income derived from operating that crane for hire?
But it's not done there.
It's not there.
Well, I know you don't. He's going to move it off to somebody else's property to use it.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. With that, I'm gonna close it to the public, and yes, you know better than that. With that, I'm gonna close it to the public and bring it to the board for discussion.
Dean, I have to ask again, is it legal to run the crane business from the residential zone?
The issue of the home occupation business has been an ongoing thing for a few years. It predates me, for sure. When I first was presented with this issue in the middle of last year, we looked at what we had in our records, and then we looked at the ordinance. And we determined at the time that they were meeting the terms of a home occupation. We still had concerns with the structure and the storage units and their location and everything like that, but the terms of a home occupation, in that they didn't have, you know, an excess number of employees going there, the equipment is stored inside, and et cetera, et cetera. The only thing that maybe would be in question would be whether there is nuisance, noise, that kind of thing, and we have not observed that, and we have not observed. I was asking Rob, and the several times that he's been to the site, have the cranes ever been there, and the answer was no. So, but, so anyway, we have determined that it is a home occupation and that they are meeting the requirements, probably just barely squeaking by, but they are meeting the requirements of home occupation.
Now,
Notwithstanding the issues with the quote, structure, unquote.
there was one other discrepancy that, I believe the lawyers say they had 6 acres that they had, and then the neighbor said it was 9.6 acres, is it?
There's a substantial chunk of that, and I wish I'd printed the plan out bigger because the printing is so tiny I can't see it. But there's a public service PSNH easement that crosses
Right, I
across the
saw
whole
that on the
thing.
map.
And it looks like it takes probably at least a couple of acres, maybe 3. And then there's a wetlands section that crosses that they'd have to meet the setback as well. And then there's a very small New Hampshire Electric Co-op easement as well. So they're kind of hemmed in, so where they build has to be in here. And then I printed out the tax map with the contour, and it does start going up.
Down, right.
So they are kind of hemmed in. Now, whether they have to be right where they are, I don't know.
It's 9.69 acres.
Okay.
Total.
Minus
You know,
whatever the
Right.
public service easement
It would
crosses.
just seem that we could appease the neighbors and the homeowners by moving the structure to a
But my understanding was the application was for the building, the temporary structure as it is presently built and situated. If we're telling them they have to remove the storage containers, then they can just relocate that Rhino back, or Quonset hut or whatever they put up, move it back a couple of feet, and they won't need the building, they won't need the setback they won't need the variance setback. You see what I mean? They can set it
So
back
what
far
you're
enough.
saying is, A, we can ask that if they want to remove the variance, or you can deny it.
I think that I don't know.
Or
it just-
you can
seems-
accept it.
It seems, well, the way it's presented, the variance is to accept with the storage container, the structure with the storage containers, correct?
I think you have it's a two-part question.
Right.
And you've answered the first part, and that is the storage containers.
And that's been denied.
Right.
So we
And
do
then the
not need-
second part is the distance.
But the distance, the way I read this, was also
Predicated on the
predicated
container.
on the storage containers located where they are, with the structure with the storage containers located where they are. If the storage containers are to be removed, then they don't need a variance, we don't need to, if we simply say, I mean, if you want to, I suppose if we want to, we could deny the variance,
Or,
but I don't think it,
there's 3 avenues. You can deny it based on the fact that we denied the containers, and then it makes, they can
That's a
fix the
redo.
problem.
Right.
That's one. 2, you can accept it, and then they could drop the Rhino and put it
Right
in-
back in the
right back
spot.
where the spot is. Or C, they can, I forget what the word is, they can,
Equitable waiver of dimensions.
no, but it was, they can take their variance back. Because if it's denied, then they don't have another opportunity for another
Oh, they-
variance.
They could withdraw that request.
Withdraw,
Well,
that was
yes,
the word I was
yes,
looking
withdraw
for.
that
Thank you.
application, because if they need to build a different structure,
Right.
and
Yes,
they feel they need the variance, then
they could withdraw
They
that
should
at that
probably-
aspect of the request
It-
for dimension, yes.
it probably would make more sense to have them withdraw that application, so that when they decide what they're going to build, if because of the
No, because it's 2 requests.
the lay of the land, they need a variance, then they can come back and ask for it.
So, it would be right of me to open up and ask them, they have a choice, we can continue to hear this application, or they can ask for a withdrawal. I can ask that.
On
if
the
they
aspect of dimension,
Yes.
yes.
have- Okay,
Because if I remove the containers and put a wall in,
on this rare occasion,
because I can just put walls in at the same height.
on this rare occasion, I'm gonna ask, and give you an opportunity to give us direction. We can continue to hear the application for the setback, or you can withdraw it. And I'll let you tell us what you would like us to do.
Well, because you just decided that the containers have to go, my client just pointed out to me, if he wants to build walls and remove the containers and build walls, we'd still like you to consider the setback.
Okay.
Because if the containers get removed and walls are in the same location, all our arguments about why that needs to be where it is are all valid.
Okay, very good. So,
So then you need to decide whether you want to do a variance or the equitable waiver of dimension. And I don't, it doesn't matter.
And what does the equitable variance of dimension give?
The equitable waiver of dimension basically allows the structure to stay where it is, but you're not granting a variance. There's criteria for equitable waiver.
Now, there are four that they have to.
So it's a,
it's a four-part thing
Yeah.
here.
yeah, it's a lower hurdle.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly which.
Appendix B is what they wrote up in here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, there's four criteria, and I'm going to summarize here because it's rather lengthy, but the violation has not been noticed for a period of time, and it's been substantially completed. The violation was not an outcome of ignorance of the law or the ordinance. The location does not constitute a public or private nuisance. And cost of correction far outweighs any public benefit. They're going by what the applicant stated previously about they use the edge of pavement as opposed to property line. That is their that is how the condition came to be.
So, one of them was the noise factor. Now, whether we move, you said it would be, right, noise?
Not on the equitable waiver of dimension, no.
No.
The equitable waiver of dimension is strictly the dimensional aspects.
So you have the same structure,
Different
Yeah.
walls.
different walls on it, same height, same view,
Except that it won't be.
except you won't have the storage
specific
containers.
Storage containers.
If you're at that point, I don't know why it can't be moved just a few feet. I mean, we do have cranes. I'm not sure how it lifts or how you deal with that roof system like that. It's not for me to know.
I mean, that's, if it's honestly that close, I'm not sure, I understand why, based on the plans and the contours that the tax map shows, why it can't be pushed back a couple of feet and get it out of.
Depends on how close those wires are.
Well, there's no, I don't know if PSNH has actually
like-
built it. What happens is when the utility company takes these 100-foot wide easements, you can't build any structures
Right.
under them. Whether there are wires there or not, you still can't build a structure.
I think
under
that
it.
might be the
So
problem.
You have to stay away from it. So I'm not even sure where exactly on this property this structure is. Where does it sit? On the buildable area of this property. if the barn is right there, and I know that there's apparently a new house that's being constructed.
If you look,
Wetlands run out this way.
They could move the structure down a few feet, but the trouble is, that's the wires, they follow the wires.
if you look at the plot plan that was provided with the application,
I'm looking at this right here.
yeah, they're not as close as that picture, but if you look at this plot plan,
Oh,
That
yes.
shows the house and the barn.
Right.
Where's the,
the structure in question is approximately,
Maybe it's in that one.
In there, it's not right up against the, that's not going to.
it's between the barn and the
Plot plan?
99.85 foot marking. It's in between there. It's probably closer to the 99.85 foot marking
Yeah.
than it is to the barn.
There it is.
and there is a contour line that comes back.
Doesn't
to
show the
fairly
wires.
close to that.
So the 43 and 47 foot that have been mentioned are from pavement. The,
Well, wouldn't the pavement be on the outside of the property line?
oh, yeah, yeah, so the right-of-way is
Oh,
is
so that's how the
probably
mistake
Yeah,
happened.
that's how it
yeah.
should be measured from the pavement.
from a
It's entirely
pavement to the
different.
property line, there's probably, and it varies, but there's probably at least 7 or 8 feet, maybe more. So it may be, the structure may be as little as, could be as little as 35 feet from the property line. I doubt that it's less than that, but it's probably, it may only be
probably
30, it may
stands
only be
within-
37 or 38, but it could be as close as 35.
So somewhere between 3 and 5 feet into the front setback.
Yeah,
Somewhere in that-
and that's a guess, just based, yeah. We did take a measurement from where we approximated the front property line to the structure, but we don't have that information with us right now. That's in a different file.
It's gonna be quite a operation to move those out from underneath it. I don't know how the roof system is attached to the,
Oh, he's got the crane to do it.
That's a moot point now.
I was gonna say, it's. yeah.
They're gonna
That's
they're
beyond-
gonna
that's
separate,
beyond
so that's,
discussing it now. It's just a
that-
question.
that's a
so in
moot
that
point.
case, what, deny the setback and have it built correctly.
Okay.
Then it'll be more
That's a good
conforming.
idea. Start over again.
Measure from the actual property line and do it right.
So I make a motion to deny, and do I need to go through?
Yes, you do.
Yep,
Yeah.
I do. And it's a variance. I don't have any of this right in front of me here.
This is the equitable waiver?
Okay,
No, he's denying the variance.
and do we have that written down as a set of numbers somewhere?
Well, this is what he presented.
So it's tied to the original?
Set that?
Yep.
Yep, this was the request for the variance in the 40-foot setback.
It's got numbers and everything on it, yeah.
2017.
Yeah, I make a motion to deny, equitable waiver or setbacks for
It's the variance.
variance
Yeah.
for, setback, application number 202-017-0028. The variance would be, you know, in this here, if it weren't for the complete deconstruction of the, storage containers, you know, there would be some other part of this. So, the variance would be contrary to the public interest, and that can be corrected at this point. Spirit of the ordinance is observed because we're bringing it into greater compliance. Substantial justice is done, and we're not devaluing the value of the surrounding properties. Literal enforcement of the ordinance would result in an unnecessary hardship. You know, I would, in this here, due to the fact that we have to remove the storage containers anyways, I think gives us a spot here to measure correctly and make it more conforming. And that's what I have.
Second.
We got a motion, we got a second, we got discussion of the motion. All those in favor of the motion? Aye. Okay. It was denied.
Could I ask for clarification from the board chairman?
Yes.
We made a rule that we would not go past 10 o'clock on our meetings.
Okay.
Is that still in effect?
We can, we have two things we can do, as always.
Of course.
We can vote to continue to hear the last application and put a time certain on listening to it, or we can move everything to the next meeting. That's left. That's the board's two choices. So how do y'all feel about it? Do you wanna
Well, I
trudge through, or you wanna go
I-
to the next
I
meeting?
would prefer not to open something at 10 o'clock at night,
Okay.
myself.
I gotta work tomorrow. I'm working
Well,
tomorrow.
that's it, I'm working tomorrow as well.
I'm up at 3:45, so
Well, I'm up at about 4:30.
You're really working tomorrow.
So,
That's my feeling, is that if we've got our 10 o'clock rule, then
well, we do have the 10 o'clock rule, and it is there,
I'm
so
concerned that-
based on that, we're not gonna open up I do apologize, but we're not gonna be able to open this up to the time constraint of 10 o'clock. So you'll be first on the agenda at the next meeting. Any questions, sir?
Yes, I'm the applicant for this,
Yes.
I understand there's a 10 o'clock rule, but we tried to get this in front of this board with great patience tonight, because I have a purchase and sale agreement, which is based upon us going through this process and finding out from the city if we can move forward. So this is reliant upon tonight's, and we urgently put all of this information together with my attorney to get through this in a very expeditious way to build a home in this area. And I know 5 minutes perhaps wouldn't give it justice, but I have a feeling that we'd love to present this, because, as again, I've got a purchase and sale agreement which is null and void if I do not move forward tonight. So there is a time bound on this, which is very urgent to me, and unfortunately, with 2 cases taking 3 hours, I had nothing I can do to speed that up, so I'd love to
Okay.
have an opportunity to present this with, if possible, if I could.
Let me discuss this with the board real quick.
Sure.
How do y'all feel?
No, I don't want to carry this 3 hours.
10 o'clock.
If it's.
15 minutes?
If he has time, if his
You got-
purchase and sale is time of the essence, then I don't feel my lack of sleep warrants killing his PNS, frankly. I would just as soon give it a time limit, no later than 10:30, absolutely no later than 10:30.
Wow, I was hoping 10:15.
Yeah,
but-
Well,
10:15 is
go
where
for
I'm
it,
going.
then 10:15, that's fine, if they can whip through this in
10:15?
in 15 minutes.
Yeah, then let's,
Then we call it at 10:15.
this is going.
Mike, is that good with you?
Yes, sir. Yes,
They just wake him up over there.
well, I'm looking,
Okay.
as long as he's willing to remove the shed down the road, let's go for it.
All right. We're gonna allow this to move forward only till 10:15, so I hate to put it that way, because I don't like giving people time limits, but
Well, I've had some experience with this board, and I believe that this board recognizes efficiency for what it is and doesn't hold it against the applicant, so
no,
we'll be efficient.
Okay.
Okay, I just want to, if I may, we have two,
one second, just one bit of housekeeping. Please add that into the minutes, that this was structured and voted to stay open till 10:15, okay?
and in fact, the purchase and sale agreement does expire, okay?
Nope, I trust you.
Yeah, and I have two, you should have two maps, existing conditions, proposed conditions in your packet. I just want to give you the lay of the land before I go through the criteria, okay? And then this is part of the old August Park development, the Reggie Bisson, that goes up to Southdown. You get the lay of the land, okay? And the lot in question,
64.
this will become relevant in a couple of minutes, is right here. And as you can see from the shoreline, the lot becomes, the depth of the lot is affected versus up here, okay? And it's gonna become an issue in the presentation because we're looking for a variance from, with the raising of all the structures on the lot, we still need a variance for the shore side of things and the road side. The sideline setbacks come into conformity. Incidentally, Bill Philpott for the record. The green space ticks up, although it's conforming to begin with, it ticks up to the better as a result of the movement. The applicants are asking for, with the structure, they're asking for a garage, which obviously is accessory use. The configuration is such, if you will, there's somewhat of an elevation of what is going to go on here. The inclusion of the garage puts it in the setback limitations on the roadside, okay? But again, given the climatic conditions that we're faced with, this is not Palm Beach. I think it's reasonable to expect that a new structure, a residential structure, would at least have a one-car garage. Now, again, additional background information. This is a dead-end road, so it's not a connector road. And typically, when you have the road setback, your reasons are for line of sight and to cover an eventual expansion, if you will, of the road, which would be in the context of a connector road. This is not a connector road. This is a dead-end road. Okay. With the regard with the issue of the shore setback, the existing structure, as you look at the conditions, existing conditions, proposed conditions, the existing camp structure is non-conforming. It's in the 50-foot setback. the proposed, with the raising of the structures, all the structures on the lot, we're bringing it forward ever so slightly to make it more conforming from the shore. So there's pluses all the way around here. Before, we had a sideline setback problem with that shed and the positioning of the camp on the lot. We're bringing it down to two areas where we need variance. Of course, on the shorefront, it's pre-existing, non-conforming, and I think in the mix you should measure that. And the fact that they're bringing it forward and away, that's about a foot, okay? I'm not talking about 10 feet, just so you see what I'm talking about. But it, nevertheless, in the balls and strikes category, it's a plus. I've laid out the criteria in my application. If you could grab that, I'm going to summarize that. I'm not going to go verbatim because that's just not necessary in the presentation. The variance will not be contrary to the public interest and the spirit of the ordinance is done. These are typically handled, and I've cited the case law in here as two, under the proposition that it meets the basic zoning objectives, okay? We have a situation where we can't meet all the setbacks. The setbacks from the street are, to a lesser extent, aesthetic, but for sightline again, and for the prospect of future expansion if the road had to be expanded if it were a connector road. Of course, this is a dead-end road. It's a 30-foot right-of-way that's through there. On the other side, you have the railroad tracks that come up and abut the road. So it's not contrary to public interest or the spirit of the ordinance in that context. On the water side, you have aesthetic considerations and you have water quality, okay? We have an existing camp situation that's non-conforming. We're bringing that to the better, approximately a foot, so that the movement away from the lake it has aesthetic qualities to enhancement to it, and also the further you go from the lake, obviously you have better quality, water quality, that sort of thing. All the non-conforming structures, which are a fire pit, a number of uses that are out there. This is Tablet Rosa. It's going to be a clean slate, so that the current environmental aspects will be put in with appropriate drainage, that sort that catch the runoff from the eaves, etc. And again, I don't want to be compromised by brevity, but it's in writing. I know that all you folks can read, and I'm just trying to summarize it so I hit that mark up on the wall, which I assume is correct. By golly, it is correct. Substantial justice is done, okay? It's a plus situation. That the proposed development is consistent with the area's present uses. We have photographs of the area. It's in transition from camps to residences. If you'll notice from the photos that I have here, the proposed structure that the applicants are making are very similar to what has been done on other lots, given the fact that these lots are, they are 60 feet, they're only 60 feet wide. But in this instance, the special aspects of this lot is it's up in the curvature of the bay, and is one of, if not in that particular area, one of the depth of the lot is definitely affected, and makes for the special circumstance. Okay. You got a question?
Is this elevational line, is this what I'm seeing here along the water side that dips in? Is that an elevational line?
So is that, are you asking, is that 504.32?
I can't see it on this, it's much too small for me.
Check one of the bigger
Oh,
ones.
one of the bigger ones? Okay, yeah, okay, thanks, guys.
My
Yeah, this 506 is just an
506.
elevation line, all right.
That's an elevation.
Okay. So that would be high lake elevation, that's what I understand. That would be the criteria for measuring the shore anyway. You all set on that?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. So, like I said, there are several properties, not that it's particularly germane to this application, but there are a number of properties that have been either rehabbed or the camps have been raised, and similar structures have been built on the lot where the garage faces the road. Okay, in order to bring that in particular, these structures here, very similar to what the applicant is proposing for elevation. It's conducive to the lot. It gets your garage accessory use, and it gets you reasonable living space without pushing it out towards the lake. It's coming in about a foot. I'll be square with you. If you didn't have the garage on this, you could make it conform, but an accessory as an accessory use, you got to agree with me that that's reasonable in this neck of the woods, having at least a one-car garage. Particularly, not that value is in the equation, but the price of cars nowadays, you don't want to be leaving them out. It's not like when a car was, first car I bought was $1,800, so I guess I'm showing my age. That was off the floor. Those days are gone. So, getting into the nitty-gritty, if I will, Mr. Chairman, and by the nitty-gritty, that's the hardship end of things, which is always a challenge. Do you have any questions of me, Mr. Chairman?
Move along.
Okay, that's what I'm doing, okay? There's not a diminution of surrounding property values. As I showed you, this is going to be in conformity with what's happened in the neighborhood, as I've shown you the photographs of existing structures that have, camps that have been raised, and new housing constructed very, very similar to what we got, and realizing the dimensions of the lot and working within the lot. The literal enforcement of the ordinance would result in unnecessary hardship, and you have the special conditions of the lot is at this point where it's positioned with the undulations of the shore. It's right in the, I don't want to say it's a cove, but it's right in the bend of things, and which by necessity makes the lot narrower, not narrower. The length of the lot is less than adjoining lots, okay? Thus we have this problem with shore side and front side setback. So we have a particular special condition to this lot, i.e. that dimension, as I've explained. There's no fair and substantial relationship between the general public purposes of the ordinance provision and the specific application of that provision to the property, okay? There's no compelling argument that I believe can be made that the public's going to be affected by this. It's a benefit. We're moving from a camp environment to a residence that's going to be the camp is non-conforming in several respects, the coverage of the land setbacks, but it's also not conforming to building codes, life safety, etc. So you obviously with the new structure, you get a situation that's conforming all the way around. Okay, it satisfies the fire department, satisfies electrical code, plumbing, etc. So that and it's reasonable. We're not asking to cover the whole lot. We're just asking for the two dimensions, the shore front and the front end, which you can't, with this lot, I submit to you, and bearing in mind the need for an accessory use of garage, you can't get away from it, given the dimensions of the lot. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. We're going to open it up to questions. First question.
Is there a, and I'm going to ask this for real, is there a porch to this on the water side? Deck, porch?
No.
All that's taken into consideration?
No.
Now,
All right.
the hardship, I'm going to tell you ahead of time, your hardship for future use of a deck, for applying for a deck, is being used up tonight if this is approved. So, giving you a fair warning, there's not a hardship in the future for a deck, okay? Just want you to know that up front. Now, number two, the shed's gone. There's no hardship for a shed in the future. So I'm just trying to lay some groundwork for the future. After a house is built, there's no hardship for a deck and there ain't no hardship for a shed. Okay?
Yes.
Because tonight you're saying you got a hardship to build your house. Okay? So I just want to get that out on the record and everything. That was my only two questions.
Save my questions for next month.
Mr. Philpott, there's a letter here from the neighbor concerning the boundary line. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Because we had David Dolan survey it and prepare those plans.
Well, and I have, well, do you want to open it to the abutter? Because
Yeah.
I can
I'm
speak to that.
I'm gonna, real quick, because I'm gonna try and get this really quick done so we can get a vote done in 2 seconds. Anybody from the public who wish to speak for or against this application, please come forward at this time and introduce yourself for the record, please.
There she comes.
No rush.
Ma'am,
Don't
rush.
fast.
Take your time. We're not in that much of a hurry.
I know you all. Donna England, Pogus Park Road. Couple of questions. How far?
To the board, please.
Oh, how far is the house from the water's edge? How many feet?
31.
Have
30
they
and a half.
gotten approved from the state to have it that close?
Well,
Actually, it's less-
Pre-existing condition, so 483 allows for replacement with existing conditions, and that's noted on the plan there.
As long as you're building in the same footprint.
Right.
Yeah, well, we're building it back from, so if you go that way, then you have problems.
No.
Footprint, if you bring it more conforming by chasing it away from the shore, the 483 still works.
Let me get, well, they need a shoreline
You can make
permit.
it, you could make it conditional on them receiving state.
Okay.
Either state approval or confirmation that they don't need.
Yeah.
Okay, and is it 10 feet on
Yes, ma'am.
each side? So they're using, so is their percentage of green space gonna be okay? Are they gonna use like pervious driveway to, so that you have the right percentage?
Yeah, let me show you the chart here. We're kind of rushing things along, I don't wanna,
So your green area goes from 67.81 to 68.84%.
It goes up slightly.
there's
Goes up
ever,
slightly.
it's ever so slight, but it's to the plus with the
Okay.
new structure. Removing all the non-conforming coverage, which is all impervious.
Okay,
And that's based on the survey.
okay, all right. I was just concerned about the 30 feet.
Very good questions.
Okay, thank you.
I have to ask my question then.
Front and back is also on the side, because the lawyer's saying it's only the front and back.
Right, because the house is gonna, new house is gonna be wider than the old house,
That's correct.
But it meets the 10-foot side setbacks.
But that's gotta be, you're giving a variance for the side also.
No,
No, front and back.
No, 'cause
just
it's
front and
10
back,
It
cause,
meets the
10
side
feet on the
setback.
sides. That's all you need, is 10 feet on either side.
Yeah.
and it meets the side
It meets the
setbacks.
side setback.
Not in the front of the wall.
Oh, I know what my husband's saying, because he's within the 50 feet of the shoreline, because,
Your two sides of
remember,
the
we ran into
house.
that.
Your two sides of the house that's inside the 50 feet will have to go through variance. That's what you made us do.
I don't understand that logic at all.
Well, we didn't either.
We didn't either.
I don't either.
You forced us to do that.
Side setbacks?
If your house is this big today, and now you're going to make it wider and deeper going towards the road, the side, you have to, your footprint as you're defined, it has to be the exact same footprint.
If you're
Front,
within the
back, and
50
sides.
feet of the water. That's
No,
what we had to go through with our deck.
I've had, I'm gonna throw Dean a bone here. Remember this, Dean, I don't usually do that, but I can't imagine Dean coming up with some logic like that.
No, not
Leave
my,
Sideline setbacks.
not my logic.
This is Brandy.
Was this a deck that was built after the fact because the house was built on the 50-foot setback?
It was all because of wrong information that was told to us.
Is that the house we're talking
Yes,
about?
that was
Okay, well,
still-
that's a different set of circumstances that were based on it, because the house was already constructed, and what you were looking for was a deck, which is different than building the house. You see, the house was built.
Right, but we were also told that we had to
That's
make
fine,
sure.
though. We just want to make sure.
Oh, okay, all right.
This question's for the owner. I noticed there's a for sale sign up there. Are you selling the place?
That's,
He's buying,
What's that?
he's the buyer.
He's the buyer? You're not Mr. Damaris?
No.
Oh, okay, that's,
There's a sheet in there which I'm acting as the agent for the
It
owners.
was written in there.
yeah.
It was
Well,
written in there.
What's confusing me is that the person who is applying for the amendment, for this, is Richard and Deb Damaris.
Well, they're the owners, they have to join in the application.
What's that?
They're joining in the application, so,
Right.
you know, actual property owners, but they're granting Mr. Daigle the right to come forward
Yeah.
and seek the conditions, satisfy the conditions of the purchase and sale agreement, obtain special
Okay.
permit variance.
That makes,
Well, I was confused because I figured if you were Mr. Damaris and you're selling,
no.
Yeah,
Since-
understood.
okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else from the public wish to speak for or against this application, please come forward at this time. Let the record indicate no one else from the public wish to speak for or against this application. I bring it back to the board. Any further questions?
I don't have any further questions. I want to comment on the letter that we got from the abutter about
About this.
talking about the plan.
Right, yeah.
I got a copy of that plan, And it looks to me as though the boundary line that the abutter is concerned about is actually their southerly line,
Right.
and they abut, this
Somebody
lot
more.
abuts the northerly line.
Right.
And when Dave Dolan did the survey, he actually holds to one of the rebars that Wheeler put in to do the Rainville survey. So I don't think that this variance is going to affect the waterfront on the Rainville lot at all. So I just wanted to make sure that that got in the record in case the Rainvilles had any question.
Very good. Yes.
I would suggest to the board that you put a condition, if you approve, that you put a condition that because of the side setbacks being so close to the property lines, that when they install the footings, that they have the footings surveyed so that we make sure that we're not going to be causing any encroachments.
Okay.
7 inches of.
As an aside, you do that anyway, and I'm, after 42 years of litigating, where foundations have been placed, I am absolutely convinced that foundation guys do not bring rulers to the lot and measure.
They're
They
gonna
just
wanna bring 'em here.
They eyeball it. They do not have a ruler in their toolbox.
I'm gonna tell you, for your advantage and financial advantage, there was a house that built a garage that took a corner off their garage.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
So, I would ensure that when
I
they
vaguely
spot
remember
this,
that
they
one.
spot, I'm just trying to,
Yep.
trying to explain, okay? Duly noted, if it's a, yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
We don't have an exception to that because we're gonna do it anyway, because that's prudent.
Well, we're happy for you. Okay.
All right.
Any closing comments? No, any further questions? Any closing comments?
No.
Close it to the public, bring it to the board for discussion.
Sounds reasonable to me.
Just like all the other houses up there, and they're doing that with all of them, so.
Yep, improvement in the neighborhood, replacing all of these old camps. It's a very old subdivision. Yeah, I think it's perfectly reasonable.
I miss the smell of black mold.
Okay, motion?
I'd make a motion to approve application Z02018-0002 for 64 Pogus Park Road. A variance for front and rear setbacks, to raise the lots, raise the structures that are on the present lot and erect a new home with attached garage. The setback from the water will be 30.5 feet. The proposed setback from the road will be 19.6 feet. The shed that is currently on the lot will be raised, and there will be no further additions to the structure. The variance will not be contrary to the public interest. It is in keeping with the spirit of the ordinance in improving old neighborhoods and replacing old homes with new ones. Substantial justice is done in permitting a new home to be built and the conveyance to go through. The home itself will be improved, drainage will be improved, and it will improve the value of the surrounding areas. Literal enforcement of the ordinance will result in an unnecessary hardship in that because of the shape of the lot, the concave nature of the shoreline, it creates difficulty to place a home the 50 feet back from the shorefront. Further, this is a non-conforming lot of record to begin with, and all of the structures, for the most part, are in some form of non-conformity. The proposed use is a reasonable one, and there is no fair and substantial relationship between the general purposes of the ordinance of the provision and the application of that provision to this property. I would put on the conditions that the applicant obtain either a permit from the DES for the shoreland construction or confirmation that they don't need one, and the condition that the footings be surveyed and measured when the foundation is poured to ensure that the 10-foot side setback is adhered to.
Second.
Discussion? Yes. And along with that, somewhere, the third condition is that they have acknowledged the fact there's no deck being allowed in any of the setbacks
Okay, I did mention that
on the
earlier, but-
property.
But we can put that as a,
We didn't say deck. I want to
that's
specify.
right, I did, I just said structure, that's. true.
Structure.
Let's,
I'm trying to get the
Yep,
English
yep.
down to it. And/or a shed in any of the setbacks.
Okay.
If I may just, for the record, structures, and I've just dealt with this at the office today. DES regulations, waterfront regulations would allow them to put a patio, granite patio out there.
I didn't say anything about the DES.
Okay, all right, and Laconia does allow that too.
We just said your hardship for putting it in there, if you remember, sir, I said that your hardship is being used up on building a house.
Yes, and
in the setback.
And I understood that to be a wooden deck or something like that.
As opposed to a flat stone patio.
Flat stone
Yeah.
patio. I have-
That's it's whatever they say is
Good go.
Pervious patio.
a wooden deck,
Yeah. Just getting clarification.
Trex deck, composite deck, steel deck.
Got it.
So the third condition is no
Tonight-
deck,
Tonight, I'm not arguing with you.
no sheds
Okay.
within the setbacks.
Right. Is that
That's acceptable.
acceptable? To the second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion? Congratulations.
Before you buy your home.
Very appreciate your staying over.
Welcome to the neighborhood.
You actually are.
Yep.
Boy.
I make a motion to close the meeting.
Making a motion, we adjourn, right?
Yeah.
Second vote, yay.
All, yep.
We need to
Oh, my God.
Pictures on your, one of your things. Reason, my house is one of the pictures.
Okay.
I only bring it up.
I want to take back everything I've said about bureaucrats.
Roland, you got tissues?
I would have never thought.
What are yours? Our house is like that.